bring the budget workshop back to order. We're going to go ahead and move on to miscellaneous funds. So, Mike or Jason?
I'll take it. Okay, so we've got miscellaneous funds. These are all of our special revenue funds where we have a certain revenue that's restricted for a certain purpose, so we can't use them in the general fund, things like that. One example is gas tax. So you'll see Fund 109, secondary road construction. We are required to spend gas taxes on transportation improvements or transportation maintenance. So these are all of your restricted revenues that we're only allowed to spend in a certain way. So they're housed in a separate fund to make sure that we account for those and they are expended correctly. First couple funds, we've got our traffic impact fee fund and additional impact fees. These are how we budget the fees that are paid on new development to provide capital for that development. Section 8 rental assistance, the secondary roads as mentioned, tree ordinance fines, tourist development fund. That is the amount that was determined through the TDC process, where the TDC met in May, made recommendations for funding for our tourism promotion, and that was presented to the board and approved. Next is 911 surcharge. That is the 50-cent fee that is charged on folks' telephone bills to support the 911 service. $990,090. That's a decrease because of a one-time capital project in the current year. Drug abuse fund, that is for drug grants, Edward Byrne Memorial Grants, and we budget those as we get those. That's why we're starting with a $0 amount in the current year. Next is SHIP. That's the dock stamps where we use for our SHIP housing program. MPO, that houses the funding for our Metropolitan Planning Organization. Next is the Multi-Jurisdictional Law Enforcement Trust Fund. That is where the sheriff expends dollars from seized assets during criminal investigations. Native Uplands acquisition for upland mitigation dollars that are paid. We invest those funds there. Next. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Two of those on impact fees. I know we had a large surge of commercial in the 16 through 18 cycle, and it seems we don't have as many commercial site plans. We do have. Sorry about that. So I don't think we have as much commercial in the pipeline as we did in the prior 2 years. What else are we attributing that forecasting to show that $4 million reduction in impact fees?
So really more so than a reduction in the impact fees that we're receiving, this is reflecting how much we're planning to spend. So we're spending some fund balance there primarily in the current year. In this year, we don't anticipate collecting $9.8 million of traffic impact fees. We're collecting and expending that. We'll collect a couple $1 million in impact fees. So we are seeing an increase in the revenue there, which you see reflected on page 55 in the detail, which shows that we are anticipating a slight increase in the traffic impact fee. And really the decrease you're seeing is because we had some a larger amount of capital projects programmed in the current year than we're recommending for next year per the 5-year CIP.
Okay, and then on Fund 123, the SHIP fund, that is in part or mainly due to the reduction in the funds received from the state as they keep siphoning off money out of the trust fund. We're getting fewer dollars into our local program, so that gives us less to.
Yes, that was cut about in half this year, as well as compounded by use of fund balance in FY18. But the legislative appropriation dropped from 600-some thousand to in the low 300s. So it was cut almost in half.
Considerably, yes. So hopefully we'll be able to put a stop to that next year, that they can't balance the budget with the trust fund. Great, thank you.
Good luck.
I know.
Is there anyone?
Got to start somewhere.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to comment on any of the miscellaneous funds on the screen right now? Okay, we'll go to the next one.
On the next page, starting with Beach Restoration Fund, we've got a $5.8 million budget there, up about $2.1 million. The primary expense there is a Sector 5 beach renourishment project that we are hoping to complete starting in November out of sea turtle season. Still working through the process with FEMA on that, but we're moving that project forward. Nevertheless, some NSP grants that we have completed from the downturn, Florida boating improvement dollars, disabled access. Next is our intergovernmental grants, where we have several intergovernmental grants. A lot of these are the housing and homeless type grants that are housed there. Dory Schlossberg, which we already covered. Next is the court facilities charge and additional court costs and court technology. Those fund a portion of those court system responsibilities that we have for circuit court, state attorney, public defender, and guardian ad litem. And land acquisition. This is for the land acquisition, the expenditure of the bond funds as opposed to the debt service that you saw earlier. There's just a small amount of funding remaining there.
Okay, commissioners, any questions? Anyone from the public that wishes to comment on any of these funds? Good morning, welcome.
Yeah, Tuck Farrell, 12546 North Highway A1A. I'm with the North Beach Civic Association, and I also sit on the beach committee. I think the beach restoration thing is such a good idea for this community. It's a valuable part of our community because the public uses the beach. I mean, we're talking about the golf course, but the beaches are our other greatest asset, and for tourism. And we got hit by the hurricanes, and we do need to fix the beach, because if we don't fix it, it's our barrier island that protects not only the barrier island where people live on the beach side, but it protects the mainland and the Indian River. If that goes, if that dune over there goes, it's going to be a terrible thing for everybody. We need to protect it because the mainland is not that high when you get over to the mainland side. So it's really important to be a good steward and protect the beach, and I really appreciate your feelings about this, and I'm glad it's in the budget thing because it's such a critical part of our community, and it's such a good environmental thing. The turtle nesting is critical. We're the highest turtle nesting area in North America, and it's so critical to protect the beaches and the turtle nesting areas and those things. And as I said before, insurance is another thing, you know, FEMA insurance. If we don't have the barrier island and insurance goes up for everyone, that would be terrible. So I really appreciate your good stewardship, and I thank you so very much.
Thank you for your comments, Tuck. Anyone else wish to comment? Yes, come on up, please. Welcome.
Excuse me for being slow, guys.
That's all right. We got lots of time, Mark.
Mark Tripson, Vero Beach. I'm commenting on the beach restoration. I'm not only a beachfront property owner, but president of Save Our Shores, and we would really appreciate y'all doing all you can to keep our beaches in good shape. It's a thing of value, and that's why we changed the name from Vero to Vero Beach, and we got to maintain it. A lot of money in the county coffers just for beach. And if you don't believe me, go over there on Sunday and look at the people wandering around. They're not in the water, they're on the beach, which interests me. I guess it's just some place to go. But thank you very much, guys. Y'all are doing a great job.
Thank you for your comments, Mark. You bet. Anyone else in the audience wish to comment on these funds? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and knock off the debt service and capital projects, please?
All right. Up first is the Dodger bonds. The budget's $1,140,000. Easy for you to say. $77,188 increase. Next is the Dodgertown Capital Reserve Fund. This is where we fund the maintenance and R&R at the facility, $250,000 per the lease, no change there. Next is the optional 1 cent sales tax, $23,810,855, a decrease of about $21.6 million, and the large decrease there is just due to the fluctuation in the capital program from year to year. This is what's recommended in the 5-year CIP that the board approved last fall.
Jason, on the Dodger Town bonds, is it 2021 that our portion rolls off?
Yes.
2023.
2021 is when the 4 cent of the tourist tax and the half cent sales tax pledge goes away. There's the 500,000 a year we get from the state that continues on until 2031, but the local revenue pledges end in 2021.
Very good. Commissioners, any comments, questions on the debt and capital funds? I would like to point out, when I gave the State of the County address to the Chamber folks last week, Jess Smith's popular financial report shows that we've been decreasing our debt over the last 10, 12 years, which I think is great. And not only is our debt going down, but the debt per capita was going down. So I think this just shows great work by Jason and Michael and keeping our spending down and keeping that in control. So good work. All right, Commissioners, that concludes everything except for we have a 1:30 time certain for a public hearing for the solid waste disposal district. I believe that the sheriff is willing to have his item moved up to this morning. So unless any commissioner objects, we'll go ahead and take on the sheriff's budget at this time. So with that, Sheriff, you have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you, Commissioners, and giving us the opportunity to move up. As you know, the conversations we've had over the last several months have been some lengthy, some not as much, but certainly very informative. The discussions I've had with the county administrator as well as the budget director have been plenty. I will say we've had more discussions in this particular fiscal than we have in any other fiscal, which is certainly healthy for the county. I'll also say that as I met with each commissioner, I believe Commissioner Solari was on a CRC mission. After the Parkland incident in, I think, the month of April, I talked about a robust, very robust budget this particular year with the signs and symptoms that we've seen throughout the county. And we came in very high with some positions that I desired to fill. I expressed to the commissioners of how we were, in fact, understaffed in a lot of areas and a lot of significant areas that have high turnover rates. So the commissioners were very receptive to that, and I certainly appreciate that, in addition to the conversations that I had with the county administrator. And then, of course, our budget was submitted on 5/1, and I met with each commissioner after that and outlined exactly how we came down from 55 to 52.9, which had a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today with respect to some tragedies that have happened and some things that continue to happen. So then we settled just 2 weeks ago with a letter from the budget director indicating how OPEB was going down $266,000, which it did. So now here we are starting this discussion at $52,700,000. So I've got a brief presentation. I promised Jason it wasn't going to be a show like we had, I think, 9 years ago. I said, this is my 10th budget presentation, Jason, and there's no sense in having all the videos. He, in fact, suggested that I have a video with deputies pulling someone out of a car fire, but I said, we've already used that one, so we'll wait a few more years until we use that next. With me today is Stephanie Diakwe, who will be handling that, along with Major Eric Flowers and our comptrollers. We have our new comptroller who started Monday. She's our going to replace Amy Markham is going to be replacing Kelly Godwin in the future. So this is our 3rd day on the job, folks, so try to be a little careful with her, if you will. So commissioners and administrator and budget director, I thought we'd start quickly with a little recap. Stephanie, if we can go to the first one. This is just an example of what you saw Monday when I visited with each of you. This is primarily for our public. This is pre-Parkland. This is what the county funded, what the sheriff's office funded our SROs at the time. Every high school, every middle school, and one sergeant. Total cost $1,048,000. That came back that year to the general revenue were $524. Stephanie? This may be hard to see. Hopefully you can see it up front. This is an indicator of legislation that was signed by the governor on March the 9th. This took effect. We met with the school district on March the 13th. I elected to have every school staffed in the county, with the exceptions of 5 that are in the municipalities. So this took effect, and in fact, this is all set for just a mere 4.5 weeks from today on August the 13th when school starts again. Seems like it just ended. That's what it's going to cost us. And as you see, half of that, the arrangement that we have with the district, of course, we know the conversations that myself and the administrator have had with the district with respect to how this is going to be paid for in the future. A lot of variables we have to consider, particularly the next legislative session, that you may see some changes in that. At any rate, this is what it is for FY 18-19. So you can see that there's a cost share that's coming back to the general revenue of over $1 million, almost 1.1. And that goes back through the sheriff's office to the GR from where it came. It's that simple. Stephanie, next one. This is an indicator, commissioners, where we were before. What I've indicated in the red, you've all heard me say this before, those dollars remain at the county. They never come to the sheriff's office. So what we realized last year was $46.9. We were funded last year, if you recall, from optional, paid for our P25 radios to the tune of $691,000. That was year 1 of year 3 for the radios. Left a balance of about $800,000 for automobiles and other capital equipment, which represents about 40% of last year's capital. So you can see where absent radios, we didn't have a whole lot of capital last year. 9/11 surcharge was $212. That was funded last year. So we wound up at 45.3 minus the 524 that came back to around 44.8. To your right, commissioners, you see the starting budget is 52,730, which may differ from some documents that you have because I have included the reduction for OPEB in there, which OPEB was over, was 266,000 more, now it's 920. Our workers' comp, as you can see, we realized a small decrease. Those numbers, of course, coming from the county. And those red numbers, of course, never actually show up at the sheriff. They're at 51.2. What we had proposed was the 1.4 of optional. This past week, under the administrator's direction, apparently, and we're going to talk about that today, I was under the assumption that the 1.4 was coming out of optional as a different funding source. He's at about 856, I think. 9/11 surcharge, there was some discussion with the administrator over that. The significant increase in that was those are actual call taker positions. As you know, the law talks about call taker positions. Those are the positions that we have. In years gone by, I did not list that. I did this year simply as a funding source to try to alleviate any GR issues. So then you have the $1,084,000 coming back. So in actuality, somewhere around 48.2. So, Stephanie? These are some trends. Expenses that, you know, I heard the administrator talk earlier about some things that we can't control, particularly from Tallahassee and others. But I'll tell you that, you know, obviously our FRS rates are up. Anyone knows the sheriff's budget is about 82% personnel cost. Those are increases that I simply cannot control. So you're at 730 there. The half of the additional SROs for 18-19 equals 636.5. Prior to 3/9, prior to obviously Valentine's Day with the massacre, this wasn't a discussion. And now that the statute says, that was signed by the governor on March 9th, says you shall, sheriff shall, doesn't say will, maybe if you're thinking about it, if you'd like to do it, or if you get around to it, it says shall. And that election was made where we are covering those schools. So essentially, that is $636,000 that would have been diverted to positions that we talked about earlier in this year, where I talked about wanting to enhance and improve some positions that I think we're deficient in, or understaffed in, I should say. That money was gobbled up. That money is required by statute. It is where it is. That eliminated any additional positions that we had desired, which continues to be an issue. You see the prisoner medical fees, those are contracts that have risers in them. In fact, I should add today that we are with a prisoner in the hospital. She is having a C-section as we speak, which is an added cost when you have deputies over there. Contracted service, IT, Mr. Brown talked about hacked and attacked, and I can tell you that I'm not sure whose information is more valuable of being hacked and attacked than the sheriff's office information and the data that we collect and protect. You have an increase in that. A lot of software has increases built in maintenance fees and the like. Liability insurance, not that bad, $33,000. Jail repair and maintenance, that increases. We've got documentation to show where the contracts that we have existing and the position of the agency's antiquated jail continues to rise. Friday and Saturday we had a humongous flood in our jail because of the rain and because of the construction going on. Mr. Brown was made aware of that. We're working together on that. Our fuel is up slightly. Remind yourselves that we don't pay what the average consumer pays because of the fuel tax. So you're at 1.7, commissioners, right there. 1.7 of dollars that I cannot control. And if you look at the administrator's budget request versus my budget request, to be quite frank with you, 51 million, that's not possible. So we'll go to the next slide, Stephanie. This is something that we used to call attrition. You remember it was on the about a third of the way on the opening budget page. Of course, these are dollars that when employees leave or separate or go into drop, these are actual realized dollars that we have to pay out. Right now we're on task. That was at 7.1 of 18. Now I include these in our personnel and our line item personnel expenses. So what you have there is we're expecting, of course we still have 80 days, 79 days left in the fiscal. It's probably going to be around 650. We do have charts and graphs where we can kind of predict where that one person has to drop out his separation day. I got a retirement notification this morning at 7 o'clock from a 30-year employee that I did not expect retiring, although he's in a different fiscal. Those are the things that come up. Those are things that you've got to be fluid on, and I think the Office of the Sheriff has not came before this body for budget amendments, with the exception of some optional dollars during the Great Recession. Stephanie? This is an interesting thing I shared with you commissioners on Monday. This is a fact. Your average jail inmate population is up. There's a trend to this. The Florida Sheriff's Association industry standard shows that it's around $90 a day. That all depends if the inmate has HIV, pregnancy, dialysis, which turns out the homeless that come into our facility that are typically not on dialysis, when they come into the facility, they show signs and symptoms that they need dialysis. And we take 2 inmates that I'm aware of 3 times a week to kidney dialysis. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting that on the outside. We have an obligation to do that. We, as not only the sheriff's office, but the county as well. So we're looking at an average daily population of 70 more head than this time last year. You're going to see a graph in just a few moments that we can talk about why we think that's happening. But I will tell you that this trend is in the last 6 months, which gives me some concern. If that continues, you will see our newest building that was built in 2006 that I would be required to open those pods. In fact, I talked to Major Selby Strickland last night, and I said, how close are we? He said, we could open it today. Because when you have, for example, 45 females in our 41 females in one of our pods that's built for 25, there's a bit of an overcrowding, which could lead to some other issues. Commissioners, I bring this up because when that trend continues, When I open that, there's 2 pods there, 2 dorms. That's called direct supervision, which is, not to get too detailed, but it's a little bit in the weeds in that you have to have experienced deputies in there because it is a large room, essentially with a yellow semicircle where the deputy sits, and there's no bars. This is direct population. Of course, we classify the inmates that go there as very low risk, but sometimes they fight. Sometimes they like to fight with the deputies. Those things do happen. We're estimating, well, we're not estimating. We know that it takes 9 deputies to run those 2 pods 24 hours a day with 1 relief deputy. So friends, you're looking at a potential of almost $60,000 a month if these trends continue. Stephanie? This is very similar to some of the graphs that Mr. Brown showed earlier, and this is an indicator of the inmate population. You may ask yourself, commissioners, why is December lower? Fact is, family members and loved ones have a tendency to bonding their loved ones out just in time for Christmas. I will tell you that there's two things of thought on this. We've had some well-heeled inmates who have come into our facility, and they have the ability and or their family to bond them out. But because of the opioid crisis, I've taken calls from family members that say that's the safest place for her. We'd rather her be with you 20 to 30 to 40 days. She's safer in there than she is on the streets. He's safer in there than he is on the streets. Unfortunately, we have become the largest rehab facility in the county. We took one last night that was having seizures as he was coming out of an opioid crisis. You read about these every single day. The police chief reported that he's doing about 5 a month of Narcan overdose reversals. We're doing about 3 a week. As you can imagine, we serve a bigger population. It's a real thing. This opioid crisis is no doubt a real thing. That being said, Florida legislation, as you know, worked hard this summer or this spring. And on July 1, that legislation has changed on the amount or the volume or quantity of opioids that you can receive. We're thinking that may help. In other words, 3 to 7 days supply versus what we've seen in the past, 30 to 60-day supply. That's something to be concerned about. The other thing to be concerned about is we saw some similar trends statewide during the recession. It indicated that perhaps the disposable income from businesses and loved ones to bail someone out of jail may have slipped a tad. We're monitoring that closely. I truly believe that law enforcement and the financial district are on the same page now. I don't believe they were 11 or 12 years ago. Stephanie? Commissioners, this is a situation where you can clearly see, as Mr. Brown pointed out, on the millage rate of compatible counties, and albeit these counties aren't compatible because they're so much larger. So what you have is a situation here where you see St. Lucie and Brevard's populations up about 1,000 apiece. So that's just an indicator that this trend continues. So it certainly does. Stephanie? These commissioners we shared with you before. The theme of this particular budget hearing is retention and recruiting. When we have deputy sheriffs that are leaving to go to other agencies for more money, that is an issue. We're simply at $38,950. This proposal increases the starting salary for a deputy sheriff to make it more compatible with the likes of St. Lucie County. So that's something to be considered. The deputy sheriff's pay has not changed in 11 years. Something very, very interesting to think about. And it's got to do with retention and recruiting. It simply does. So next. Commissioners, this is a quick graph on the separations that we've had. And you can see 76. I shared this with you Monday. And it's some of the indicators of where our personnel are going to, similar to some of the folks that you have going to other areas as well. So, Stephen, any questions?
Commissioners, any questions of Sheriff?
Not so much, maybe for the sheriff, but the SRO money that comes back is to come to an understanding is where does that get booked? If it's a net and we know it's coming back, you count it in the budget, but you know it's coming back, so you can really take that off as a portion of the increase. So maybe just kind of setting the policy on how you're looking at that number.
Right, so good question. The revenue per Florida statutes comes back to the county commission. We have budgeted that increase from the school district, so the school district has increased their funding for the 50%. It's not covering the full cost, obviously, it's 50% of the cost. We are accounting for that in its own, for the SROs in its own separate bucket. We're keeping track of that per recommendation from the Florida Association of Counties. And our policy, just to reiterate, is that we are recommending that we fund the other 50% cost for this budget that we're working on now, but for 1920, based on the potential impact of Amendment 1, that we may not have that luxury next year, so that we would need to make a reduction in the funding for the shortfall potentially next year.
Okay.
Is that it, Commissioner? Commissioner Fleischer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question for the sheriff as much as some comments. Again, Sheriff laid it out. I think he mentioned the word trend over half a dozen times. And the trend is that before the sheriff comes before us, he lays out his budget, talks with the county administrator, hones some numbers down, and then talks with us. And we all had the occasion to speak with the sheriff. And in doing so, in that trend, we probably all had individual comments. And I trust that the sheriff absorbed those comments as best he can. We have to be guarded a bit because we don't want to get into micromanaging. The sheriff is an elected constitutional officer and has to design his budget to see as fit as the way any other constitutional officers design their budget. I didn't see any drawdown on the past constitutionals that had to talk about their budget. As a matter of fact, I don't hear any buzz beforehand and any angst and acrimony about their budget. But what I do see is that their budget is accepted, and perhaps maybe they speak with Jason a bit beforehand and touch down some numbers. But they have a lot of finite controls, a lot of fixed costs that they can talk about. And that's what we, all of us, understand, being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. So we have the opportunity to be able to assess and control control what we ask of the constitutionals if they come before us individually. But that's where it changes for the sheriff. Personally, I understand what he's up against. I don't believe that any of y'all have had the experience to be able to understand the 80-20% rule, where 80% of the time everything goes according to plan, according to fixed costs, according to SOP, according to regulations, and 20% it just doesn't. And that 20% is the most costly. That 20% is what we hear about, what we see about on TV, what we see in other jurisdictions, what we see in cost factors, what we see in 66 of the other counties that also have the same yearly trend confrontation, that the sheriff is providing for a budget, and it's the biggest thing on the list. And you know that publicly, a couple years back, I offered the sheriff that I would tone it down when I saw the angst that was happening. I said, I'll roll up my sleeves and I'll offer to sit down with you, Sheriff, and I offered my services. The sheriff said at that time, keep your cufflinks intact. I'll do what I can. And I appreciate that. And this year is no exception. Looking at the budget of course, in talking with the sheriff, and I hope you don't mind, I said to the sheriff, there are some areas of concern. There are some areas that would not be my budget. If this was my budget, it would be lower. There are a good handful of areas, and I'm not going to point out any one of them at this point, because that's the sheriff's obligation. He's proposing his budget to this county commission. But I did talk with the sheriff and tell him a bit, and I said, if you want to discuss any further, please don't hesitate. Do I think that my thoughts on his budget could bring it to the number that our county administrator would like, that all of us would like? No. I do believe that it can be reduced. I do believe that there are areas where we might be a little plush, Sheriff. But you know what? The jurisdictions that weren't plush were the ones we see on TV. The places that were not prepared for that other 20%. And we see that there's always a drive afterwards, the media covers it, that there's an appeal for more funding for the sheriff or for the chief administrator, that we need to assist the local law enforcement, that we need the help of the state and the federal law enforcement, because the local law enforcement was not prepared. Again, I don't necessarily agree with every line item, but I think it's disingenuous and unrealistic for us to go beyond just being good stewards and asking the sheriff to grossly reduce his budget. And I believe that the number that is being purported is a gross reduction. Now, I say that without reservation, but I also say that I hope that the sheriff, at the end of the year, if we all enjoy the luxury of the safety and security that is provided by the sheriff's office, that he's able to return some funding back to the citizens if there is some extra funding, as is what is customary with all constitutionals. I would like to see funding towards the entry level and operations level, where the rubber hits the road, and not necessarily on the top end. And, you know, we mentioned something about our cybersecurity. Technology has to be continually updated in the sheriff's office. So I'd like to recommend that we accept the sheriff's budget as proposed.
Is proposed by the administrator or proposed by the sheriff?
As proposed by the elected sheriff.
Commissioner Solari.
Some comments. First of all, Sheriff, I'd like to thank you and your office for all you do. I mean, you know, I want to begin with that because you have a great office, and when we talked about your budget in the office, you asked me one off-budget question: do you feel safe? And I've always said a number of times, both privately and publicly, that I do feel safe in Indian River County. And more importantly, my wife feels safe. Me, I tend to stay, I'm either here or at home. There's not too much, but my Jackie is much more out in the community than even I am. And I feel good knowing that she's safe, and that is a very important thing to me. So to you and all your officers, thank you. But as we go along in this conversation, I'd like to put it into context just a little bit. And Jason, if you could go back to that spreadsheet you had on the increase in the sheriff's budget and BCC budget over the past years. I mean, it goes over for roughly an 11-year period, just from about just before you and I started, Sheriff, in the county, up until the proposed budget today. And of those 11 years, there's only 1 year where the BCC department's budget increases just a little bit more than your budget. But in the other 10 years, your budget increases more than ours. And if basically the takeaway from you from that graph is roughly since 2007, 2008 to the proposed budget today, for every dollar we spend for BCC departments, we're now spending roughly 91 cents. And for every dollar you had, you're spending $1.18. And I'm not saying that that's out of order in any way. All I'm using that as an indication to reinforce what Mr. Brown said earlier, in that we have prioritized public safety. And I'll also note that when you adjust it for inflation, you're spending the same number of dollars that you were back in 2007, 2008. So that's, you know, a realistic number. But for myself, looking at the entire budget, I've always felt that the government ought to be thinking of the citizens' pocketbooks often, and that it was good that we went through the Great Recession similarly to the people who are paying the taxes. They cut back and we cut back. So that to me is basically a starting point. And my takeaway from this is that your requests this year and other years have never been profligate. I've never said that you're asking for things you shouldn't ask for. I've always said that me as a commissioner ought to take a harder row of prioritizing things, and that's probably something I'll continue to do. That all said, I realize that this year you probably do have some additional stresses on your budget, but I'm looking forward to next year, like Jason too. We are looking at some additional stresses too, and for me, they're called Amendments 1, 2, and 5. And when you take that combination of amendments that may well pass in November, we're looking at what I consider to be a fiscal apocalypse. I mean, not only is it the $3 million that we may have less in Amendment 1, and I'm going to guess that Amendment 2 will probably pass, but Amendment 5 is particularly worrisome because it sets us up for the case where in the next downturn, we're going to have cuts from the federal level, the state level, and locally. So anything that we add to the budget this year will probably roll over in future years, so I'm just cognizant of that. So I also don't want to do anything like have a significant millage rate increase this year, which might cause citizens in this county to say, they are being profligate over there in the BCC building, and that's a good reason for us to go ahead and approve Amendment 1. So again, that's just a long-winded way of saying, you know, the context I'm working in. That said, I'll grant that there are certain stresses, and while I can't go with the full increase that you're going for, I could certainly go for some. And I would start with the idea that, given that the school resource officers is a one-year deal in my view, I'm voting for it this year with the understanding is that we'll be fortunate in our attempts to get the legislature to do the right thing and fund it fully next year, that we move that line conceptually. Could you go to the budget page, the full budget page if you have it, Jason? And basically what I'm going to suggest, your line, Jason, under the recommended 2018-19 budget is the $49,798,000, and that includes the new school resource officers, correct?
Yes, we have recommended.
Okay, so basically, I would take that $636,000, if that's the number that the two of you agree on, move that down to where the sheriff's electric and the SCAAP grant are. So add the $636,000 there, but leave that $49,798,000 number the same. So that would basically increase your budget by that amount. And after listening to Commissioner Flesher, I'd be also happy to agree that any monies that you return to us at the end of this fiscal year, we would roll that over to your budget next year. So that would have, as I understand it, Jason, no impact on the ad valorem taxes, but it would give the sheriff more to spend next year. So, I mean, that's, again, I'll always...
Commissioner, you're saying roll that, and obviously the Constitutional can't hold those dollars, they're returned, so.
No, they're returned to us, but I make the...
So we're gonna earmark those and
I'd make the commitment that any dollar, so if you rolled back $300,000, $400,000 to us this year, I'd make the commitment, and I'm,
So you're saying roll back with funded at my request?
yes, if you come back and you say, so if you give us back the $400,000 at the end of this,
If we're funded at 52.7,
no, you're funded at the 49,798,
49 million.
49 million, but,
Oh, you cut me real bad for a minute there.
but we've moved that
Rolled back.
$700,000 below, so that gives you 700,000, and if you gave us back, say, $400,000 at the end of this year, make the commitment to give you back that money next year, so that you put you up to $1.1 million over the initial number recommended by the county administrator. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
That's, all due respect, I'm not interested in that. This is a robust agency in a fantastic community. We are a premier law enforcement agency. I can look at the different charts and graphs with respect to the BOC or the BCC's budget. Finite amount of times and hours they work in a day, probably 2,080 hours in a typical work year. Indian River County Sheriff's Office is premier. We are outsourced to other adjacent counties because of our expertise. These men and women have not had a basic salary increase in 11 years. We held the line. We continue to return dollars. In fact, this year alone, this fiscal year, we'll be returning $175,000 within the fiscal. And that's a combination of our dollars left over last year and the SRO dollars from the hybrid year. This agency needs to be funded, as Commissioner Flesher has said. Too many years, Commissioners, we've been put in a position where we get a county administrator's budget recommendation. We already talked about FD this morning, Fire District at $40 million. They've had $5 million in capital in the last 2 years. They're a district, we get that. Good for them, they get that. So you're at $40 million for your fire, and we're at 52.7 for the deputy sheriffs that are working hard every single day. Forget about the 170 deputy sheriffs that are dealing with 5,500 inmates a year in the county jail, that are having them spit on them. They're taking them to the hospital. On average, 95 overnight stays in the hospital our correction deputies are doing. You're talking about 250,000 calls for service a year. This agency deserves to be funded as requested.
Have anything
I have
else?
nothing else to add. Thank you.
Commissioner Zork or Commissioner Adams? Commissioner Zork?
Yes, I think when we look at whatever budget number we end up with today, that we need to have something that keeps the jail population number. We can't agree to a budget number and then they have crossed the threshold of the number of inmates and then that triggers that $59,000 a month cost and expect that to be absorbed into whatever the final budget is. One suggestion I had is maybe, in the beginning of, I think the first Tuesday of the month meeting we get certain basic statistics, unemployment statistics, maybe having the jail population number listed there, so when we see the magic numbers crossed, we know that's going to kick in additional expenses, and we don't have a choice of when the judges place them in your facility, that you couldn't expect to absorb that type of dollars in whatever agreed to budget we have, because that's $60,000 a month is a huge number to cover that you wouldn't expect to be, or at least I wouldn't expect to be covered in the budget we're trying to work out today. That's sort of hopefully the trend will change and we won't cross it, but I think us knowing what the population is each month, that average, and what's the number that when we cross it, we have no choice but to open those, that would not be part of kind of the budget decision today.
And I certainly agree with you, and I could have opened Echo Building earlier if I was trying to make some type of statement of what it's going to cost. I was informed last night by the jail director that fortunately we're taking 11 to Department of Corrections, prison, that have been sentenced in the past few days next week. And when I look at just 11 people going to prison, of course there's going to be 11 that replace them. But I'm looking at all of the cost involved. And I can certainly provide you that, and we can boil that down even deeper. I would caution you that those costs may and probably will go up But at the end of the day, Commissioners, we're talking about an agency that has nearly 500 employees, that protects everybody in this county, assists every municipality, and additionally exercises restraint and caution when need be, is there for hurricanes, is there anytime something comes up to handle. I was watching Annapolis 2 weeks ago, and I was looking at the response from those law enforcement thinking, we've got deputy sheriffs at $38,950 that are risking their lives to do similar things every day. Just by the grace of God, that does not happen. We've got telecommunications officers, 911 operators that are working for $25,000, $26,000 a year, answering calls that no one in this room would answer. You know, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This is the opportunity to right-size this agency. We're talking about $1.7 million apart from me and the administrator. You're talking about recruiting and retention. You're talking about having deputies that are not going to Palm Beach County, that are not going to St. Lucie County. And what I'm asking for isn't even as much as St. Lucie County. But we are Indian River County. We are the place people want to be. But our public safety, to some extent, is not recognized that way. In fact, when the budget is put together, Mr. Brown comes up with a number that fits into his budget. This 51, and he'll tell you, I talked to him in length on June 26th, and actually it was an hour and 8 minutes, and we had a good conversation. I think we did. But when you think about organizing and putting together a public safety budget around what fits with the county, you know, so that tells me that a couple things going on, either, and trust me, he respects the heck out of the commissioners time and time again. He has told me, this is my direction. He's a great soldier. He's a great employee. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I get what his mission is. His mission is to find a number that fits, and Sheriff, you deal with the rest of it and make it happen. But if we were truly Indian River County, as progressive as we need to be, and we're $1.7 million apart, with the added responsibilities of the SROs. By the way, Mr. Brown's proposal does not have a lot that we expected coming out of optional. Friends, there's dollars in optional to pay for that. In fact, your fire rescue district, some of their large rolling stock is being paid out of optional. You know, if you read in the budget book that I recently received, and it talks about how optional is being spent, and it talks about, perhaps, maybe I'm misreading it. In fact, Eric, if you could pull that up, I have that. It leads me to believe that, obviously, primarily for roads, we get that. But it sounds as if almost, maybe we don't have roads ready. That's what I'm taking out of it. We're having a discussion over making a premier agency status quo for $1.7 million. $1.7 million. We have an equally impressive premier fire district, taxing district, thank God, that's going to pay for that. This is right out of from the budget book, and the bottom is 1819. The OST fund budget, which I didn't know that meant budget or balance, is 23.8, reflecting a decrease of 21 from the current year. This is due largely to the fluctuation in capital projects year to year. In other words, we don't have things ready, is what I take. And maybe Mike, Finance Director Mike, can explain that to me. I don't know what that means, to be quite frank with you.
Well, Sheriff, one thing is we have our 5-year capital improvement plan. And so every year there is sales tax dollars going to those capital projects. So you might see a balance now on a year-to-year basis, but over the next 4 years, a lot of those funds have already been accounted for in that fiscal year in our 5-year capital improvement element.
I was just a tad confused. Very similar to the year before. Also, it's interesting to note that, of course, we have an increase in optional, this as reported earlier this morning. So we're talking about things that were paid for last year out of optional, included $691,000 for P25 radios. We all know that we're in year 2 of 3 of that project. That is something, if you look at the balance of last year's capital, that left us $800,000 to buy cars. The way Mr. Brown's got it prepared this year, with what he's got in optional, minus $691,000 for P25 radios that have to be purchased in year 2 of year 3, it's gotta be purchased, leaves us $281,000 for capital. $281,000 for capital. How many automobiles will that buy you? The answer is not a lot. So my plea is to make this right, is clearly, to fund the capital that you have included out of the optional. That would leave you a slight balance to make up the full complement of the sheriff's budget as submitted.
Commissioner Adams, do you have any comments? No? Okay.
One question, I think, Sheriff, you mentioned the difference between you and the county administrators is 1.7 million?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it 2.7?
No, sir.
1.7.
Okay.
There's a
Oh, the
million right
bottom.
there. We got that covered.
There you go, Commissioner Solari.
No, I was reading on the
Alright,
total
moving
general
along.
fund line. That's what the 2 points.
Well, we've got the optional out there, just for what it's worth.
The decrease in the optional, it's actually $978,650 is what we are recommending. What we were trying to do is recommend that we transition away from using the sales tax for all of the capital that we can, and that's consistent with what we're doing in the fire department. We're buying ambulances and fire engines and brush trucks, some of those from sales tax and some of those from the fire district itself. So some of that is a transition away. That also gives us some resiliency. This is one of the things that we're trying to plan ahead for Amendment 1, also to have a little bit more flexibility in next year's budget. I do want to point out that we are aware of how important what the sheriff's office does. It's the most important service in the general fund. That's why it gets the most money. I think we do prioritize it. I do, if we could put something on the overhead. Oh, it's not.
Well, Jason's doing that, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask how much the sheriff returned back to the county coffers last year?
Be a total of about 170,000.
170,000.
I just want to talk about the flexibility, the ability to be able to fund the full request of the sheriff's budget. The county administrator's recommendation is an increase of $2.5 million from the current year. The sheriff's asking for about a $4.2 million increase.
And one thing on that, the 4.2 includes the million that's going to come back for SRO, correct? So really, it's 3 point.
No, we're getting about 500,000 or 600,000 more. So yes, so the impact on the impact on
true,
ad
'cause we
valorem is about 500
Right,
less.
okay.
Actually, $1,084,000 is coming back to the county.
Right. But we got 524,000 in the current year, and that's something that's
Right.
already built into the
Now-
budget.
Now we're tricking things up.
No, we're not.
You're getting
No.
$1,084,000 back to you.
Out of that,
Yes, sir, that comes to the general revenue.
No, but we're talking about how much, as opposed to last year, how much
Oh, last
additional is
year.
coming back
Oh.
this year. You know that, Sheriff.
No, but I sent back 500,000 last year of the SRO money.
Well, yeah, and you sent back the year before that, the SRO money. Every year you send it back. So on an annual basis, you have a baseline, and we're working up from the
increased
baseline.
amount,
I
okay.
got you, so there's $1 million.
And I will say that that's per Florida statute, that the sheriff's revenues have to come back to the county.
course.
And so if you look at page 30, we do budget all of those revenues that the sheriff does send back to us per Florida statutes. So it includes the SROs, by far the big number. The current year budget is $635,630. Next year's budget's $1,212,479. an increase of 578. Most of that increase is SRO. So yes, that does come back to us, but we don't take, you know, the implication is almost like we're taking it and hiding it and squirreling it. By budgeting it here, we are keeping the tax rate lower for the residents. If we didn't budget it, we'd be taxing $1.2 million more than we are, and I don't think that's a good plan. But if I can call your attention to what's on the overhead, and I apologize for my chicken scratch, but I just worked this up, you know. So we had a good tax roll increase. The economy's good, right? Our tax roll went up by almost 6.9, almost 7%, 6.93%. With no change in the millage, that's an increase of $3.7 million. That gives us $3.7 million. The sheriff has asked for $4.2 million increase. The other constitutional officers combined are going up $300,000. And I don't know, I mean, I think overall the other constitutional officers' budget requests were responsible. I mean, if the board doesn't think we should give the clerk a $22,000 or 2.2% increase, I'm fine with going back and asking him, you know, when he's cut a position already and he's going up 2.2%. I don't know how that's us picking on the sheriff. I mean, we'll go back to the other constitutionals if that's what the board wants. State agencies, this is an uncontrolled cost. We have to fund the court system. It's in Florida statute. They're going up $300,000. The biggest chunk is Medicaid, and that's a number we get from the state, and we send them a check. By the way, if we don't send them a check, they just won't send us sales tax. So we could try not sending them the money, but they just won't send us sales tax. We have an increase of $300,000 in children's services, which is a path we set last year.
Mr. Chairman, Jason, when we booked that, though, on the earlier discussion, it's 56 or 65. I don't have the
56,000
because of the
250,000
from last year.
We wanted to try and get the money on the street, like making improvements, making things happen the first year. So we had a $250,000 expenditure of fund balance. So the impact on the general funds on the ad valorem is $306,000. That's $5.1 million in increases from non-BCC departments. To tell you, I say this all to say that if we have to fund, if we fund the sheriff's full $4.2 million requested increase, aside from drastic cuts in the BCC departments, we can't do that in a sustainable fashion. We're getting $3.7 million of ad valorem. We've got some other things going up too, but just if you look at those things, that's $5.1 million of increase. I'm $1.4 million down. We've got some savings. The OPEB saving us a couple $100,000. Oh no, all of that's in the. It's about $100,000 of OPEB savings, and the electric's going to save us $250. So I got $350 towards it. But this will require us to cut the BCC departments in order to fully fund the sheriff, unless we're going to have a tax increase. So we can do it with a millage increase, but if we're to fully fund the sheriff's budget, my recommendation would be a tax increase, because I don't think we can get accomplished what the board wants the BCC departments to accomplish without a tax rate increase at that.
Mr. Chairman.
Sheriff, turn.
First of all, I hadn't seen those documents before. Actually, you're comparing apples to oranges. None of those agencies are full service 24 hours a day. We've already talked about optional that's available. Mr. Brown likes to talk about raising the taxes as a threat, as an idle threat. Fact is, Mr. Brown comes up with a proposed budget number without any type of formal knowledge of what we do. He is a great money guy. His mission is to plug it into the county to make it work. To sit here and tell this commission, who knows better that you do not have to raise taxes to fund the 1.7 that we're a part, that knows that those dollars are available and optional, but to talk about raising taxes, that was a characteristic of others in the past. The fact is, the premier agency in this county those men and women that start at $38,950 need to be increased. We need the retention process to continue. Absent the retention, what do we have? We have young deputy sheriffs going to high-paying jobs in surrounding counties, and here we are training them again and encouraging them to do the right thing. By the way, we start at $38,950. You know, the dollars are there, and I think it's disingenuous to talk about raising taxes. That's simply not the case. And I think we can agree on that. But I get the role of the administrator's job, and he and I talk about it in length about that. But the dollars are available. This is the time, the 18-19 year, with everything that's going on in the county, in the state, in the country, and in the world, to have and maintain a premier law enforcement agency. It's that simple. You know, I can talk to you about the specialty things that we're recognized for. Yes, that's fantastic. However, that's not going to sustain. The dollars are there, and I ask for your help.
So Sheriff, where I'm on this is kind of one, looking at your corrections budget and using the $90 per day per inmate number that you provided. If I look at last year's budget, your average jail population was 441. And if I do the math, that comes out to 14.5 million, but yet your corrections budget was 16.1. So there's over $1 million excess there. Your current proposed budget at 511 average inmates is 16.8, and you're asking for 17.6. So I think there's a little room on the correction side, realizing though that you've pointed out your jail population is going up. I know last year we funded you for 30 new positions, but only 18 were filled, so there's some leftover dollars there. And I understand you need to get your salary up. I don't know if we can take that full jump in 1 year to go from 38,950 to 42. You might have to do that over a couple of years, but I'll leave that to your discretion. But from a dollars point of view, Jason, if we put back in the 330 of sales tax that you're recommending to reduce and put them back up to the 1.3 that we funded last year, and then take 500,000 more from ad valorem, can we do that without impacting the millage rate?
I'd say in order to get there, I'd recommend 500. We can do 500,000 more in the sales tax. I'd rather do 500 there and the 300. I'm trying, what's the 300?
Okay, it was 330 sales tax and 500
Okay.
ad valorem. You're saying just flip that?
Flip
500 sales tax, 300 more ad valorem?
I think if we we'll have to make a couple of adjustments. That's as far as I think we could stretch without doing a millage rate increase. But I think we can make that work. We'll need to work over the lunch break to figure out how to get that 300,000 done. But I think we could make that happen.
Okay. Well, Commissioners, that's where I would be. That'd get us halfway to where the sheriff wants. And let me just categorically state, Sheriff, this is in no way about the job your deputies and people do. And we talked about this back when you were asking for some hurricane reimbursement. This in no way reflects on the job that the men and women in your department do. It's about us having to balance all of the needs of the community, keeping in mind fiscal responsibility. I think we've shown in the data that we have increased your budget over the years more than anybody else. So we do take your role seriously. We understand the importance of public safety, but we have a balancing need here that I believe. And so that's where I'm at on this. So I would be kind of meeting you halfway at, I guess the total number would be 51.8 with 500 from sales tax and 300 more from ad valorem. So commissioners, that's where I would be, I don't know. We've got a couple different options on the table right now.
You got there a little differently, but that's very close to where I was before, just a little bit above that, so I'm good with yours, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Commissioner Zorker Adams, any, you want to pick? We've got two options right now.
Right.
Commissioner Flesher has recommended the full sheriff request, recommending an 800,000 increase mixed between sales tax and ad valorem. Do you feel support for either option or have a third proposal? Where would you be at?
Leaning more towards Commissioner Flesher's total number, but will probably have to be some tweaking in there.
Well, how do you tweak it?
Well, I'm chicken scratching as we're talking, so I don't have an answer yet. I still want to keep in mind, though, that this, whatever number we end up with, is with the understood jail population, that the E block is not funded in that. Because that's 750,000 if you have to open that.
So can I say something on that? If those blocks, they're the direct supervision, they're a large amount in one block, right? 64 or 128 or whatever? Because it's 256 in what we built. The $23 million facility that we built has 256 beds, and I think it's 4 pods of 64, if I remember correctly. If you're over that and you have maybe 20 Indian River County inmates that are there, there is the ability, and we've done this in the past, to rent out space, because you're gonna need, as I'm hearing, the same number of corrections officers and folks in there to supervise 20 versus 64. When Sheriff Wheeler, and I think a little bit when Sheriff Raymond was here, we had out-of-county prisoner revenue, so we would get that as a revenue that we use to fund some of those additional costs. So I'd like to keep that
Well, that's true. You
concept
could
in
book
mind.
that with it, that if you had outside revenue, that would offset that.
And if I could add, Mr. Brown's incorrect. Sheriff Raymond never did that. Sheriff Wheeler did. This is prior to the federal courthouse opening in St.
see
Lucie
that.
County and Fort Pierce. I talked to Mr. Brown about this on June 26th, and we had kind of a laughing chat about it. And that was his way of saying that's the way we can offset accounts. I talked to him about that, and I said that doesn't happen any longer because of just what I just mentioned with the federal courthouse. We're not housing federal inmates. It's not feasible to house federal inmates. Federal inmates of a different classification, we're not going to put them in the Echo building with minimal classification inmates, because again, his knowledge of what the sheriff's office does is not in that area. It's obviously in accounting.
Commissioner Adams, do you have a voice?
Or do you want to use it?
Okay, so I would want to know from staff where you would propose cuts to make either one of these scenarios work before I make a decision on which scenario I would be more supportive of. So I know you said you would need to do you'd probably need to noodle some numbers, so I personally would like to see those numbers before I decide.
We'll need to come back in the afternoon particularly for the 1.7. If we're to fully fund
I just need to understand what we're going to be cutting if we're going to go with
Right.
either one because there's some things in the budget that need to happen. So particularly, within some of the other stuff we've already approved that needs to be done. So.
But
Thank you,
Commissioner,
Slaughter.
my understanding was that Jason was going to take the one slug of money out of optional sales tax, which wouldn't impact that any, and that he'd just tighten up on probably some reserves or other things that would result in the additional funding to the sheriff's office without any cuts in anything that we've already gone over.
Correct.
Is that accurate? I mean, we're not
We would
cutting
have
anything else that you have budgeted in other departments.
On the 800,000 scenario,
Yes.
we would have some minor cuts, but not, I think we could do it without a significant impact on operations, but if we're go to the full 1.7, we got to redo the BCC department budgets, and we'll figure
Well, do we
out how to
redo
cut.
the BCC department budgets, or do we increase the millage rate?
Or increase.
That would be our decision
Yeah,
to decide which path to go.
Yeah.
So I think,
We could go beat up on the other constitutional officers too, if that's the thought, that their 2.2 and 3.6% increases are too much, because I'm getting the impression that it's being stated we're picking on the sheriff's budget, and I just don't understand that, honestly.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Fleischer, then Commissioner Zork.
and to the county administrator, I just meant that it is the trend. It is, again, albeit the largest portion of the budget for constitutionals, but again, we continue to come in, accept what the sheriff has to say, and then say you have to return 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. Historically, he knows he's here to confront the cut, and we know we're going to attempt to cut. That's why I still stand behind my proposal. But if we're giving the opportunity now for our county administrator to take a look at where the numbers are so that another commissioner can feel more comfortable with the decision, why don't we give the sheriff a little extra time too during that break? And when we return, perhaps maybe he can find a few numbers that he's willing to compromise. But he is the elected sheriff, and I do believe that he's got a team with him that he would be able to perhaps maybe find some areas of comfort that he can feel more comfortable without.
Sure. I appreciate that, Commissioner. Major, can you pull up the,
Commissioner Zork, did you?
If, probably they're going to be on the same computer, but on one of the slides from earlier this morning where we had the pie chart and it had constitutionals, reserves, and other uses on it, so that would be one that Kristen would have to bring up. So in the reserves, I can find it in the book, but the 9.5% of reserves equates to how many dollars, and obviously a portion of those can be used as a balancing factor or to cover some of the numbers we're looking at, so we don't have to have a
Commissioner Zork, the board historically has been very opposed to using reserves to fund ongoing expenses.
Okay.
I think,
not ongoing, but either rolling stock or capital or something else that's,
yeah, but remember, once you set that funding level, you're gonna fund it the same way next year, and
Okay.
you're gonna have to keep digging. I would be opposed to taking anything out of reserves.
Okay.
I would agree.
At least wait a week before we hit reserves.
Well,
Budget set.
we've done things like use some reserves to pay off a bond item when it became callable, which would reduce the interest requirement every year, which would reduce our ad valorem expense. So I think that type of use of reserves is appropriate, but not funding ongoing
And Mr.
budgets.
Chairman, the idea of using reserves during a positive economic time, I think is extremely dangerous, because when the next recession comes, we're going to be scrambling in every freaking possible way to keep millage increases reasonable. So I'm with
So I
that,
think-
Chairman.
Sheriff, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do now is obviously see if you can sharpen your pencil some. Jason will sharpen his over the lunch break. And then we'll pick this back up after the solid waste public hearing. I don't expect that to go long, Sheriff, so you'll, probably about like 1:45 or something. We'll continue with your budget. And before we adjourn for lunch, is there anyone in the public that wishes to comment on the sheriff's budget at this time? And it's still good morning, so good morning, welcome. Your name and address, please, for the record.
Sir, good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael C. Marsh, P.O. Box 691061, beautiful Vero Beach, Florida, 32969. And good morning to everybody, first and foremost. Good morning, Sheriff. Hopefully, Sheriff will stay around a little bit. I had a couple questions. I guess he's not, so God bless, Sheriff. Have a great day. First and foremost, Mr. Brown, great job, sir. I would not want to be you every single year. But you know what? If no one else tells you today, Mr. Brown, you matter. Now, I'm here today for a few different reasons. One, it saddens me that every year the sheriff gets to pick when he wants to go. I mean, does all the constitutional officers just say, hey, 9:30 doesn't work for me, 1:30 doesn't work for me, I'll just come whenever I feel like it?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
The administrative staff sets the agenda. We usually take the other constitutionals first because their budgets usually require a little bit less discussion. Historically, the sheriff does take more time. In this case, we had him listed later in the day, but because we got through all the other items earlier, we went ahead and moved the sheriff up, and that was a decision mainly by myself. I'll take either credit or responsibility. And the board concurred, and the sheriff said he was okay with moving it up, so that's how that worked.
Okay, I appreciate you explaining. I guess because this is year 2 in a row that when yesterday I call up one of the commissioner's office, I get told, oh, Mr. Marsh, right after sanitation, the sheriff will go. Now, as we can see, there's not too many concerned citizens here, but what if someone did want to come and ask the sheriff a question about SROs, body cams, or something? You know, why can't we stick to a time? Because the same thing happened last year, but needless to say, that is answered. It saddens me that every year this happens. The sheriff feels he does not have to answer to the public. And I get that. I've learned so many great words from last year: micromanage, ministerial, hi, county attorney. And the sad part is he's an elected constitutional officer. Correct, I get that. We can't micromanage. But just like he told Mr. Brown, you don't understand corrections, sir. Board of County Commissioners, except for Mr. Fletcher, who else has law enforcement expertise or a background? And 1.7, that is a very familiar number the sheriff kept speaking, you guys kept talking about. You know what other number is almost 1.7? The premier agency paid out that number in lawsuits. They were so premier, but we got all this money being paid out by the county. So it's kind of sad, because this is almost like one big game to me, because at the end of the day, you guys don't get to go through line items and say, Sheriff, no machine guns this year, Sheriff, because of the way this is structured. And I really think as a county, we should go away from this. Look at the cities. Any amount that's over, what, $1,500, the chief of police would have to say, the city manager, hey, can we get this approved? Why is it we only focus on that last number and everything else in his budget means nothing? He can have a dunk tank with my face on, and you guys would approve it, because we don't look at the line items. I mean, right or wrong, that's correct. The second thing,
Answer that one?
would you approve the dunk tank, Mr. Solari?
No,
Okay.
because to answer your question, though, about the difference between the sheriff and the police, is the Florida Constitution. Under the Florida Constitution, the sheriff is a constitutional officer.
Right.
And so that means he's elected by the people, where the chief of police in the different municipalities is not elected by the people. So that's a crucial difference. And that's the difference which I believe we understand, and which the people of the state of Florida have said that they want. So there's the difference.
100% correct, I agree with you. But the other thing is, as a county, we do not have to stay at this type of plateau. There are other counties that don't operate like this. And I can't think of a name. I think it was.
I can tell you, there are a couple counties, Volusia County and Miami-Dade. Those are charter counties.
Sorry, that's where I was going.
And as a matter of fact, we're not going to be a charter county. As a matter of fact, the biggest issue when I was running for election the first time, I ran on the idea of not becoming a charter county, because I believed that was the wrong way to go. And when I was elected, that gave us a 3-2 split vote, and we went away from charter county. And since that time, I haven't heard anybody want to resurrect that. And there is a constitutional amendment coming up on the ballot, which I believe would basically do away with the ability for charter counties to actually have appointed constitutional officers. So that option may well be gone after the first of the year, if the citizens pass that amendment, when it goes into effect. So that's a path which we're just not going to be taking.
I understand that. Before I move on to my other 2 items that failed to get mentioned in the sheriff's budget, you know, as public servants, it's great to see some of the county commissioners, when I reach out and I can get a response, even if we can agree to disagree. Mr. Solari, Mr. Fletcher, fine man this Fletcher guy is. Miss Adams, I got to sit down with you. And at the end of the day, I really think, I understand we're here for the budget, but you know, as public servants, that door should always be open. And you know what? Even if we agree to disagree, which me and Mr. Fletcher have on many occasions, you know what? Everyone should be treated with respect. And I want to go back to last year for a moment, because as we can see, I don't think anybody else from the public is coming up here, so give me 5 more minutes. You know, last year, I wanted a street sign in Altiria Wood's name. And let me tell you where I'm going with this. Deputy Chambliss was a hero, and thank you, Commissioner Fletcher, for making sure, I don't know what happened with the sheriff last year. Maybe the weather, we had to wait a little bit for those signs to get up, but Commissioner Fletcher got it done for us. Thank you, Commissioner. But at what point do we get to decide who in fact is a hero, who in fact's life mattered enough or didn't matter, that we say, Altiria Woods ain't getting that street sign, but Gary Chambliss will. And you know what? By all accounts, he was a hero, and I hope the sheriff's office one day will find whoever was responsible for that. But what test do we put to say, you know what, Altiria Woods, nah?
Mr. Marsh,
Yes, sir.
if we can bring it back to the budget discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So will you spend some time and talk to me about that?
I've always been willing to return your phone call and talk to you.
Thank you, County
Give me a
Attorney.
call. If you want to come into my office, I'd be happy to chat
Coming
with you.
today. Maybe not today is a good day. Back to the budget. 2 items the sheriff failed to put in his budget. And we're talking about all these public safety concerns, right? Well, let's bring up 2 public safety concerns. One, these fine body cams. I know, another year to talk about. But guess what? Sebastian went to body cams. The first in any River County's history. Transparency, accountability, accessibility. Mwah, beautiful. But the sheriff every year won't even provide us, the citizens, and Major was here. I don't know where Flowers went. But anyhow, what would it cost a medium-sized agency, I'm sorry, a premier medium-sized agency to go to body cams? We've paid out millions. What happens when we have another police-involved shooting? What are we going to do? Indict one of the deputies and then have them go through the grand jury process? It's not about, we don't micromanage. If the sheriff doesn't bring it up, we can't vote on it. That's correct. But isn't it sad that our Constitutional officer won't even stand here? Sheriff, how much would it cost your agency? Well, Mr. Marsh, $20 million for the cloud storage, the body cams, the training. Why don't we get that? What is he, God of the county, that he doesn't answer to the public?
So again, Mr. Marsh, this is where we don't tell a sheriff how to run his agency.
Correct.
Okay, we fund him a budget amount, and how he uses that money, that's what he's elected to do. And I personally don't have the knowledge set to say, yes, we should have body cams, or we shouldn't, or what type of ammunition they should buy, or anything else that he controls. I can set a dollar amount of his budget and then let him see how to use that as he sees fit.
Mr. Chairman, that's a great point. And that goes back to Mr. Brown not being an expert in cell block E. That's the same premise that you just proven in. Mr. Brown doesn't know anything about law enforcement. I mean, did the sheriff not speak that how many times? So that's the same point. So we agree on the same thing. The last area of concern, the biggest one, the SROs. And you know what? Before we'll talk about criticizing what he's not doing, they are going to Rad Kids. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Actually, Major Flowers, we'll give him a great job on that. They're going to Rad Kids, and we can talk more about that, but that's something they're implementing. I guess they're using out of the budget. But the SROs, you know something? There's money that would have been set aside, not to just arm the teachers, but to be able to arm other individuals. Maybe that custodian who has a law enforcement background, we can deputize him. Why is it that the sheriff is not even taking that into consideration to make these schools safer? Because what are we going to do? Depend on just the expertise of that 1 or 2 SRO? It didn't work for Parkland.
So, Mr. Marsh, that would be a decision that the school board would make, whether they want to use.
He has to approve it.
There was a second bucket of money from the state to fund the training and arming of, I think they called it the Guardian program. But the decision to implement that or not is up to the school district.
Well, but the sheriff would first have to say he wants to go to it and propose it to the school board. The school board couldn't vote on it unless he decides that he wants to implement that at his agency.
Right.
I read the bill.
I think the sheriff would rather have his trained deputies serve as the SRO and not have civilians basically armed in the schools.
Yes, but that's
And I
not-
think the school district concurs with that decision.
Okay, but it was never brought to the school district to even vote on, is my point.
I don't know if that's true or not. I know that the sheriff and the school district have met several times regarding the Parkland legislation, and I'm sure that was part of their discussions. So I can't say whether it was or wasn't, but I would assume it was.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My last 3 items is, 1, I came in today and felt like I was going through the courthouse. When do we start having to pay the sheriff's department to wand us before we come in here? Because I've missed a few meetings. Is that new? Did we start today, last Tuesday? When did we do this?
Everyone that came in today was wanted.
Starting today. So this never was before?
Correct.
What was the decision, what's so significant today? Because the sheriff's here?
That was a decision the sheriff made, and that was his decision.
When we come back from the break, is there going to be another time for a public discussion from the public to be able to respond to whatever he presents when he plays with the numbers to come back? Is there going to be another opportunity for the public? There will be. All right. And let's see. I want to say, I believe that's everything. God bless St. River County. Great job, county commissioners. And hopefully next time, well, next year, we can actually fill this room up. Because it got to be more than just me who cares. Not just the sheriff. He's a great sheriff. Not my sheriff, but a great sheriff. Where's everyone else? I'm sure you guys promote this. There has to be other people in this county that say, my tax dollars, I want to see what happens. I mean, are there not? What do we do? Do you guys put this?
Mr. Marsh, I think we would all agree with you. We comment every year at the lack of public involvement. I was on Bob Seuss this morning, and I hit this point twice, that, you know, today's the day we make changes. I call it moving day. And that starting at 9 o'clock, if any of your Bob Seuss's listeners have an interest in how their tax dollars are spent, that they should come down here today. And
I came. I love my county.
good. Were you listening to Bob Seuss this morning?
No. But I like Dr. Seuss. I really do.
Okay.
Have a great
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to comment? There will be opportunities this afternoon after we come back from the break. All right, seeing no one else, we are going to take a lunch break. We will come back at 1:30, period certain, for the public hearing on the solid waste disposal district. And that point right now, we are adjourned. We will call the budget workshop back to order, and at this point, we have a public hearing on the solid waste disposal district. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. And Jason, are you going to present the SWID?
Sure, we'll give that a shot. So the solid waste disposal district budget is $15,587,145. That's up $541,500. A couple of the drivers in this are, if you'll recall, in the last year, the board approved a bid to close an existing cell of the landfill and create a new cell of the landfill. The combined cost of those two items is about $16 million based on the low bid. We're moving forward with that. As you will also recall, we are required to set aside the money to close a landfill that's open as we use that landfill, is the theory, so we're not leaving a debt for future generations to pay off. However, there's no such requirement for setting aside money to build the new cell. So that 16 million, 7 or 8 of it was to build the new cell. So one of the things that the board talked about and that we are including in this budget is that we're setting aside explicitly some money to start funding that next new cell, because it will only be a matter of time before we're doing that. So we've included 500,000 towards that, which is less than, if we were to do it, it'd be more like $1 million to fully fund what that is, but we're just kind of transitioning to that. We also have depreciation on the cell that was recently closed. That's increased the budget by about $230,000. We've had some other cost increases for just the CPI adjustments for operating the hill and the and the convenience centers, as well as we had to rebid our recycling services at county buildings, and unfortunately that bid came back substantially higher than what we were paying in the past. So those are the things driving the SWID budget up. The end result is we're recommending an increase of about 7.1% in the rates. The residential rate per ERU is $116.85. That's up $7.75, or about 7.1%. Sorry, if you bear with me here for a moment. That is $73.03 per WGU per waste generation unit, but we use per ERU because that's per household. So if you have a single family home, you're paying $116.85. That's up $7.75. Commercial rates are going up by 7.5% from $37.67 per WGU to $40.50 per WGU, and the readiness to use fee is going up from $21.59 to $24.60, which is an increase of $3.01. So that is the solid waste disposal district budget and proposed assessment rates, and this is a public hearing.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of Jason? None? Okay. Does anyone from the public wish to comment? Yes, Mr. Johnson, welcome. Come on up.
I get to come up one time.
Bob Johnson, Corwin subdivision. I was sort of under the impression that when we went to single trash pickup, that our rates were going to go down as homeowners because of this new system we were implementing. Was I under the wrong impression, and is that? And I have one other comment. I'd like to be reassured that we aren't going to take other counties' trash in the future, so that our trash dump doesn't get, we don't have to build one of these other piles again. It seems like we ought to be able to have some control over the trucks that come in and not accept out-of-county vehicles. Thank you.
So a couple things. The curbside rate for the curbside garbage collection did go down. That's not something that's on the tax bill. That's something that you would pay directly to Waste Management if you're in the unincorporated area. That's our franchise. The cities do their own thing on garbage collection. So that did go down from about $14 a month to about $10 a month. I don't have the numbers offhand, but it was a significant decrease, and it's once a week pickup instead of twice a week pickup. As to the taking out of county waste, that is certainly not the goal. We want to preserve the landfill for county generated waste, and our efforts are we're expending significant efforts to try and reduce what our garbage goes into the cell, into the landfill. We're trying to increase our recycling per state mandate, but also so that we preserve our asset that we have there, because if we fill that up, we won't have a place to go with our own garbage, and it's very hard to come up with a new place to dispose of garbage. So our interests, for many reasons, are to reduce, to not have any more going into the landfill than we have to. And certainly, it's not our goal to bring in significant amounts of out-of-county waste.
Jason, go ahead, Commissioner Slaughter.
Just to add to that, I mean, the recycling number went up by over 10%, but I'm going to guess that one of the reasons for that is the fact that we get almost no revenues for recycling now. Back about 4 to 6 months ago, China, which had been the biggest purchaser of recycling goods in America, made a radical policy change and went to accepting recycled goods with less than 1% spoilage. And that basically shut down their accepting any recycling from America, and basically meant that there was no longer any market for recycled goods, which drove any revenues that we were getting from recycling down. And it doesn't look like that's going to change any. And one interesting thing I picked off of one of the flyers at the Florida Association of Counties event a couple weeks ago was Waste Management had a sign that said that 25% of what goes in the recycling bin in their area is non-recycled goods. So, I mean, the spoilage there and what they're getting is roughly 25%. So based on those two factoids, we're not going to be seeing any real revenue for any recycled goods for probably some time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And then, Jason, do you remember, I know when we went to the single stream recycling, that was in the carts, that was done to improve the recycling rate. But do you remember, was what Waste Management was charging us for the recycle pickup more or less than what we were paying Republic with the dual stream?
I think it was slightly more, but not, so we're paying like $250 a month per household, and we were paying like I want to say two.
That's kind of my impression too, that it was close,
Yeah,
maybe just a little bit higher, but
a slight
benefit
increase.
was to increase the recycling rate.
Right, and we had the one-time expense of getting the all-new carts ongoing. You know, the hope is that it wouldn't be more expensive going forward.
Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to comment on the solid waste disposal district? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and that concludes the solid waste disposal district. And so now we will go back and pick up the sheriff's budget. And Jason, did you want to go ahead and start with what you have?
Sure. So we went back and took a look at what it would take to get to the two numbers that had kind of been talked about. So at the top of this sheet, you will see an $800,000 increase. So this would bring the sheriff's budget to $51,800,000, which is about $930,000 less than his full request. So we would fund $500,000 more in capital out of sales tax, which we have the ability to do. That is funding everything that we legally can, all of the capital in his budget from sales tax. So that would not impact the general fund. We would take a little more risk. We're upping our half-cent sales tax revenue by $100,000 and cutting a couple of expenses that we think we've got a little bit of wiggle room. What we budget for the Humane Society, which is a contracted rate, we pay for a certain number of animals. We're just taking a little more risk there. Same thing with Human Services. We had a little bit of wiggle room in what we budget for the assistance. We've utilized less than budgeted the last couple of years. And then we have, like the sheriff's got his $690,000 of radios that he's replacing for P25 compliance. We have to do that throughout all the county departments. We have been trying to do that through the taxing funds when we can. We had planned to do this as we're funding a portion of that, but we can move those to sales tax. So in the general fund, we've got $36,000 worth of radios. In the transportation fund, we have $64,000 worth of radios, so that's $100,000. And this is one of those things when I talked about we're planning for Amendment 1. This is one of the small relief valves that we had in there that next year we were hoping to kind of use this along with some other things to meet that requirement that we could move the radios to sales tax, and we were trying to not do that this year. So that saves about $100,000. That leaves us $49,000 short. We would recommend funding the rest of it from contingencies, and then we would also have about $15,000 that the board discussed increasing to the health department. We would reduce contingency to make that up there. So that's $800,000, which is what I think Commissioner O'Brien and Solari were talking about at that level. The next line, the next group is what it would take to get to the entire $1,730,745 difference would be that $800,000 that we have above. So just going down the list here, we had a time and attendance system for HR that they're needing because we have a horrendously paper-intensive and work-intensive time and attendance paperwork / computer process. We were hoping to fund this out of the budget, $100,000 as a one-time expense. Once again, that was hoped to be a $100,000 help when we got to next year. We're dealing with Amendment 1. So what I'm telling you is we're reducing our resiliency that we had tried to build into this budget for Amendment 1. So the third line there, that's the same thing. The Recreation Department has been for years trying to buy a software system to track their activity and schedule their rooms, particularly with the IG building, rather than trying to keep track of when they have rooms booked on a spreadsheet, which is far from ideal. They were looking to have a software system. This was also a one-time expense. It would also improve our reporting ability to what's going on at the IG and what's going on in recreation overall. It's normal for an agency of our size to have a recreation system, so that would go away. On to positions. We have, between the general fund and the MSTU and the transportation fund, additional positions in the county budgets. We have 4 in the transportation fund and 3, really 2.5 in the general fund. So I'm recommending eliminating the purchasing position, which is a half a position. We were going from splitting one between, going from a part-time to a full-time position. That saves $17,000. There are 2 other positions in the general fund. One is a human resources position that we desperately need so that we can make sure that we keep our payroll going, particularly if we lose the HR software system. I would strongly recommend against cutting this position. There is another position in animal control that would be more actively involved in trying to make sure that the animal licensure is up to date. We take a very passive approach to that now. This position was scheduled to pay for itself through revenue, so we could cut that if you want to, but it won't save us any money. Next is the Assistant Public Works Director position. That will save us $100,000 with all of the benefits and the operating costs. Also, the lagoon position that the board has recommended, $92,000 comes out. The drainage crew that we're hoping to add with 2 people is $107,000. The grader operator that we've added is $53,000. Additional road materials that the board had directed us to do, we're cutting $100,000 out, and I'm telling you here, we have cut any new positions. We have cut the vehicles. You'll see down below, we're cutting $2,000 of contingency, which is just to get us finally there. Animal control, various vans and trucks, and I will tell you what that will do to our capital, to our vehicle replacement program. We will not be buying a single vehicle in the general fund. I will not buy a single piece of equipment for road and bridge. Okay, we've worked a long time to build up to where we're trying to replace capital equipment in road and bridge. We will have about 2 vehicles in public works when we get all done with this. So we've cut out any new positions. We've cut out virtually every vehicle that we have in the funds, in these funds, in order to get there. That's what it's going to take without a tax increase. Now, if we want to consider a tax increase, we had performed that analysis. If we fully funded the sheriff's budget with the $500,000, we had done this yesterday. It would be in the general fund an increase in the millage rate of 0.73%, but then an increase in the MSTU fund millage rate of 8.3%. That's with $500,000 being funded from the sales tax. And full disclosure, that doesn't include the $300,000. If we took the $300,000 out, I'm just seeing that here, we could reduce those somewhat, but we would be looking at a minor increase in the general fund millage, but a significant increase in the MSTU millage of 8.3%. And it may look like I'm not funding things that we were explicitly directed by but there's not anything else there. That's what's there. So that's the recommendation of the way to get there. If you'll indulge me, I want to get to, the sheriff said that I was trying to be an expert in the jail, and I apologize for that. However, I will retreat back to my area where I have a little more expertise on the budget. And some of the items that the sheriff has presented today for his increase in the budget, there was a slide that had about $1.7 million in increases on there. The first item was an FRS rate increase. It was showing $730,000 with the rates going up over 15%. The FRS rates aren't going up that much. Special risk is going from 23% to 24%. Regular class is going from about 8% to 8.25%. So maybe about 200,000 of that is from an FRS rate increase. If it's going up 730,000, it's because when you give raises, your base goes up. So you're counting that in the raises. Also, your 7 new positions, you're going to have that causing increase, but there is not a FRS uncontrolled cause for $730,000. So I take that out, I say it's more like 200,000 would be what's attributable to the rate increase. So all I saw is documented reason for the budget going up $1.2 million, and I'm looking at a $4.2 million budget increase. And I can't understand, where's the other $3 million? I don't understand. We've asked the sheriff for various information, some of which was asked for in writing and we didn't get, but it was provided to the commission, not staff, on Monday. I don't appreciate that. I will look at a couple other items that weren't addressed. The sheriff's budget has an increase of $182,000 in overtime, which is a 23.6% increase from the current year. I could understand if his current year overtime was up because of the handling the SRO thing and the inability to fill positions. I don't know why it's going up next year. I also don't know why the repair and maintenance services, there were some items in there, but maybe 100 or 200,000 worth, but that line item's going up from 700,000 to over 1.1 million. It's a $418,000 increase, or 57.5%. And I haven't seen any justification here today for why that's going up $418,000. And in addition, the capital is going up from 1.5 million last year to 2.3 million this year. And I will say that I think it's important that they keep their capital up to date. And we talked about the IT services. I will note 500-some thousand of that was for their IT capital, which far exceeds the county's IT capital budget, which is maybe the way it should be. But I see some things there that weren't talked about that I think could use answering for why the overtime's going up that much, why there's a line item going up $418,000, and I saw maybe 150 or 200,000 of that itemized here, but didn't see the rest. So those are just some of the questions that staff has about why we got a $4.2 million increase, and I'm only seeing $1.2 million documented. I don't know why. And I appreciate that there's a desire to raise the salaries. I think the deputies deserve an increase, but I feel like I have to stand up for my own staff, okay? There's a talk of $4,000 being increased. Just so you know, we have a modest increase budgeted for our own employees, including firefighters who are public safety. I want you to know, we're having a turnover and retention issue in the fire rescue also. I don't have anything near $4,000 planned for that. So, and I can tell you in the past, these folks talk to each other and we're gonna be stuck on the back foot wondering why. So I just have to say, I got to fight for my employees. I think they've been asked to do a lot, and we're having recruitment and retention issues all over the organization as well. I think private businesses are seeing it too. It's just part of the good economy, and I understand the struggle that the sheriff's going through. But I don't want to leave it unsaid that we're having similar issues there, and we don't have the ability to give raises like that in any of our county departments, including fire rescue, which is also public safety. I think it's an important public safety function as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of Jason right now? No? Okay. Sheriff Lohr.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. Actually, I did try to meet with Mr. Brown at lunch, but he was not in his office. 3,000. That's not a correct number. 38,950 to 42,000 is $3,050. I don't know where the 4,000 came from. Anytime you propose a budget, as everybody in this room knows, you include the increased FRS. So that is a fact. The overtime is well documented. Mr. Brown and I chatted on the 26th of June about the opioid crisis and about what's happening. There is no doubt about it. Before we concluded the morning meeting, it was my impression that we were $800,000 apart. Is that, am I thinking that was where how far apart we were?
930,000.
We had kind of two proposals. One would be the full 1.7 that you're requesting, and then the other one was kind of halfway there, increasing 800,000.
Yes, sir. Can I ask a question about our funding sources at the Sheriff's Office, of course, are limited to primarily three areas: the GR, the optional, and the 9/11 surcharge. My understanding of the balance in the 9/11 surcharge, would that relieve, if we increased, as I requested, funding out of that, would that ease some tension as far as the funding source?
So, I think what the sheriff's referring to is we pay for some call-taking expenses out of the 911 fund. The current year budget, we have programmed $212,357 for that. The sheriff had given us a number of $463,678 for this year. And what that does is the more we fund here, the less has to come out of the general fund. Staff has concerns about that large an increase, over doubled in 1 year. We also have to report, the county has responsibilities, the 911 coordinator, to report to the state each year. And the state is very sensitive to the fact that you cannot use 911 dollars to pay for dispatch. So we have to make sure that we have a documented ability to show the number of call takers that we have. For a number of years, I think we were at 3, and then we changed to 5 call takers, and I think there's a higher number. Is it 12? What's the number you guys are?
Mr. Chair, if I could add that, when you talk about the calls for service that come in, not only LE but fire, and Mr. Brown and I talked about this. The fact is that in the hierarchy of dispatch, you have somebody entry level called a call taker, and that's defined in statute, as we're aware of. And then as they progress with their training, they become 911 operators. In the past, we have funded 5 of those. There's 12 positions. However, if you, and look at this from a funding source, please. If we are full, for example, which we're not, 30% turnover rate, but if a 911 operator that has had that training and has to be a call taker that day, which always happens, call takers are always full. We can provide that documentation that he mentioned goes to the state. That is a relief with respect to the balance in those dollars are there, and those dollars that we've studied continue to be there. I don't think you're going to see a decrease in cellular telephones, perhaps in landlines, but on your phone bill, you will see a 911 surcharge. And that's a funding source of at least $200,000 that I believe we could use as well.
And we have recommended a smaller increase, going from 212 to 222,000. 2 reasons for that. One is we're concerned about making sure we document that we are only charging for call taking. The other thing is the sustainability of doing that. The 911 surcharge generates about $550,000 in revenues a year. I will say the county also has 2 positions that we fund. Those are the 911 coordinators. So what 911 coordinators do is you get a new development that's platted, you've got to get those added to they're the people that add that to the GIS map to make sure that into the 911 database and make sure the alley's populated so that when somebody picks up the phone in their new home, whether it's in a newly platted subdivision or if they build a new home in Vero Lake Estates, that their call goes to the correct 911 center, because we have 3 in the county, so we got to decide whether it's going to the sheriff's office, Vero, or Sebastian. There is also just all kinds of issues with addresses that you wouldn't think would happen, but that database has to be maintained. So we've got 2 positions that we have to fund, as well as the 911 service. We pay AT&T for that service, and that is a couple $100,000 a year. So it's not an unlimited revenue stream, and if we were to increase it to the amount that's requested, I don't think we'd be able to sustain that after a few years, that we would run out of 911 dollars there.
But the adjustment is around 400 plus year 2, but it's bringing in 600.
It's bringing in about 550,000 is what we've got budgeted.
Okay.
And we've got two county positions and the 911 bill to AT&T, and we also try and save up money here. This is where we have to buy new equipment, so that when you make a transition to text to 911 and things like that, there's always a new technology that we're having to update, and we've got a mandate for I think it's for the text to 911 and the crossing the county lines question. That sometimes you have a cell phone. With cell phones, you may get a 911 call that's in Brevard County that comes into Indian River County, or vice versa, things like that. So when those things happen, we try to save up money there, honestly, because you buy $1 million of new equipment every so often, because you've got to fund a new mandate required by the state to be compliant with something, so that we can upgrade a 911 service that's provided to the public.
So, Commissioners, we've had obviously a good discussion, and we know where we're at, difference-wise. Chairman, with respect to the second option, obviously, I have looked on the short break that we had. The only thing that I would cut would be capital. These men and women work too hard not to deserve to be brought up to where they are. The theme of this was retention and recruiting, and I will stand by that. That being said, I've got $244,000 worth of stuff I'm going to cut out of capital. If that helps, maybe 100 more out of 911 that could come out of there for a balance. That doesn't leave us too far apart. Listen, I don't agree with cutting the positions that the administrator. That makes no sense. That is part of his fluid plan as well. I get it. We need grader operators. We need roads. We need all of that. So as far as I'm concerned, the second part, that should stay with respect to the county. Why would you cut much needed things when we know that the dollars are available to fund without raising the taxes? Finding it, it's available, and we realize that, and we know that. I haven't even brought up some other things that I was going to bring up with respect to, the administrator tells me the other day that some Matthew money came in, still waiting on IRMA. I'm not even going to bring that up. That doesn't matter. That's coming back to the county anyways, as a whole. And here we stand today on the 11th of July working together, knowing of what a precious jewel this county is, and now it's down to $500,000 or $600,000.
Well, right now, I think we're at 800,000 off. I haven't heard any agreement on any of your other suggestions. So, why don't we, Commissioner Adams, you've got the information now that you requested, and I'll just say, to start it off, I agree with the sheriff. The second half of what we're seeing there, I don't want to touch any of that. I think when I have my monthly meetings with the community, all of those things there is what the people are asking for. They want the roads graded, they want more code enforcement, all those things. And so I don't want to do anything on that bottom half. I'm okay with all of the suggestions on the top half. And, Jason, is there another 100,000 in sales tax we could throw in?
We can't get it from the optional sales tax because we can only pay for vehicles and the radios from the optional sales tax. So we've put it with the 500,000. Our understanding is that's the max we can do with the 1 cent sales tax.
Mr. Chairman, couldn't you do any of the capital maintenance or replacement that's somewhere in the budget and create an eligible expense that way?
I mean, I would say, I'd be comfortable increasing the 911 dollars, like $50,000 out of the 911. But I think we're getting to a point there that we've got to be careful. We could. If there's 100,000 more gets that done, we could figure out how to get there, with a little, sort of with a short recess, we could get there with 100,000. I think we could make that happen. We do have, I mentioned that.
So another 100,000 coming out of the top half. What?
Yeah, I'd say 50,000 off the top of my head, 50,000 more from the 911 dollars, and then would figure out the other 50,000 and get that done. But then beyond that, we're getting back into this list of having to do something there.
Okay. So, I could go with that. So I'm at 900 increase, Sheriff. But I think that bottom half there is pretty sacred, so that's about as far as I can go. So,
I would agree with that. I can't, I'm an infrastructure person, so the drainage and grading that's not gonna work for me. I can do the top and figure out the extra 100. I could support that. That's kind of where I'm at.
And that's basically, we've cut out anything new from the budget, essentially, is what these numbers are. We're just, maintaining what we've got and then not replacing vehicles, by the way. So.
Not replacing vehicles would be the bottom half.
That's
the bottom half.
the bottom half, yeah.
Right. So you would be replacing some vehicles.
If we go with the 900,000, we'd be restoring the second half. I'm saying anything beyond that, we're looking at, it wasn't, we're saying, oh, we're gonna cut the grading. That's one of the things that was our priorities to try and do with this year's budget, where we basically just had to yank anything out of the budget that was anything in addition to what we're doing right now. And then we pulled out any capital that was there, essentially.
Commissioner Solari, you were earlier supportive of the 800,000 increase. Are you okay with the 900,000 increase?
I'd probably like to see where it's coming. I mean, I'd say I'm not okay with it. I'd probably go with it. I know I'm with the rest. I mean, there's no cutting that bottom half. I mean, we may be able to then have a premier sheriff's department, but we're on our way to a second-rate county, and I don't think the citizens of Indian River County want that at all. And I'm with both you and Commissioner Adams. Things that most people talk about are the things that would be cutting out, including getting the lagoon back in order and getting our roads back in order. And it's something that we don't talk much about, but drainage in this county is not where it ought to be. And it's not where it was before 2006 and 2007, and that's causing a lot of people a lot of problems. Those are the type of things which end up flooding homes and did flood homes in the last hurricane. And in the next hurricane, it's going to make more flooding of more homes, which is going to destroy more lives, or as many lives as the opioid crisis. And these are people who are just hardworking people trying to do the best they can. So that crew, I think, is one of the most necessary things that we have in addition to this budget. So I certainly wouldn't want to be going home without that. So if Jason's comfortable with that extra 100,000, I probably will vote for it. One of the problems, though, is that we talk about cutting the difference between of the $1.7 million, but no, we're talking about how much additional increase we're giving to the sheriff's budget. And we sort of lose that whenever we have this type of conversation. It's not that we're talking about $600,000 or $700,000. We're talking about the rise from, depending upon which one of the numbers you use, from 49.4 to 51.8 or 52.8, something like that. So this is an increase of, forgot my HP 12C, but somewhere between around 7%, which I think is certainly a good number. And again, while the BCC budget is going down again, so the BCC department budget. So if Jason can come back with the numbers which don't impact the second half of that, as I say, I'm pretty confident I'll vote for it.
Okay. Commissioner Flesher, you were supporting the sheriff's full request. How do you feel about the increase of 900?
I stepped into this embracing the entire budget. That second half is sacred. And thank you, Sheriff, for agreeing that that second half is sacred. They are essential. But I don't think we're going to get any more juice out of the rock, no matter how hard we squeeze it. So I'll have to say I would yield to support for $900,000.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Zork.
Hi, looking at this is a similar conversation we had in Emergency Services District 2 years ago when we looked at how were we going to fund the new station at the North County Pool. And we went back and forth, and there wasn't enough to do it without a millage adjustment in the Emergency Services District, which, to keep the coverage in that area and fill in that gap of delayed response time, I went along with doing what was right, which was providing those residents in that area equal coverage and response time, and we made the adjustment in the Emergency Services District millage. Going back to the numbers that we have, so we're at roughly 900, which is going to leave the sheriff. He would have to make some choices of what is he not going to provide. Basically, what it gets down to. I'm sure there's some room in his numbers of, you budget the position for a whole year, you only hire him. They're maybe only on for 10 months, so there is a little bit of room there, but not as much as I'd like to provide him with to provide the services that he wants for the county. But I can already mentally count to 3 at the other number. So proposing the alternative doesn't doing a millage adjustment to provide maybe 1.2 to 1.4 of the number that we're trying to reach. I may be the lone wolf on that.
Well,
I just tell you where I'm at. I would not support a millage rate.
Okay.
So I
And-
speak for anybody else.
Concerned, Mr. Chairman, concerned about the mill rate as well. Eventually it's going to have to go, but at this point, now that Commissioner Zork was taking the tally, I can't count to 3 the other way either.
Right.
So I have to look for the greater good of the sheriff's office, the people that the sheriff serves, and our community, and I guess he's going to have to be a little more creative. I still would have sought for the full impact for the sheriff in hopes that he would return back some of that funding if he did not have the opportunity to use it. But it's not at the risk of losing, the second half or raising the mill rate. So I have to concede. It's unfortunate, but I can't count to 3 either. I can count to 1.5, and that doesn't do it.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman-
Commissioner
Mr. Chairman,
Fletcher.
if I could just quickly add
Yes,
that,
Sheriff.
we've talked about this several hours now, about what it means to be a deputy sheriff and to raise their starting salary for retention and to continue with the progression. What I'm hearing today, that's not going to happen. We cannot afford it. You've got a balance of your capital items that have expiration dates, if you will. You've got an inmate population that is going up. There's more food, there's more medical. I was on the phone with the corrections commander at lunch. We're gonna be $75,000 short in our prescription pills this fiscal year. You know, if this body has a creative way of me, like other sheriffs do in this state, of sending you medical bills, I'm all for it. But I can tell you, I've got an outstanding medical bill right now from a shootout that happened in Earl's Hideaway in a different jurisdiction where I housed that inmate and had deputies sit with him in the hospital. What do you want me to do with that bill when it comes in? It's ultimately the county's responsibility. And that's a fact. I've been desperately trying to work, not only with Mike, but Jason. Throughout the year, I bring items to you to offset any other expenses that's going to affect taxpayers. And then to have this discussion today, where I would be in a position where these hardworking law enforcement officers and correction deputies and 911 operators aren't going to get what they deserve. It's that simple. But if that's the message that this body wants to send, then that's the message.
Sheriff, from my tally, last year we increased your budget by $4 million. And if this goes through with the 900 additional, I've got another increase of $3.7 million. Those are two significant increases over the last 2 years. As Commissioner Solari has mentioned, our end of the things is going down. So I would say very loud and clearly that I believe that you have plenty of funds in your budget to pay your men and women what they deserve. And I have the utmost confidence that if we go through with this, that you will find a way to make that happen. And in no way, I don't think this board at all is saying we don't think the men and women don't deserve the pay increase. Just, I believe with the funds we gave you last year and this year, there is sufficient funds for those pay increases. So,
you know, the game changed Valentine's Day in the country. And those positions would have gone, absent that tragedy, would have gone to much needed places in the agency. They're not going there. They're absorbed. And we all feel the same way about how a signature from Tallahassee can change our budgets. We get that. But absent that, I'm in a position where, you know, there's positions throughout the agency that need to be filled, that aren't filled. And when they're not filled, what happens? I've got 2 inmates in Longwood Medical Regional Center right now, one suicidal with 2 deputies sitting beside him 24 hours a day with everything he does, from his medicine to going to the restroom, and another one on another floor at that hospital with a deputy sitting around him 24 hours a day, running up the overtime. You want to ask about why the overtime, so I'll be happy to tell you. 95 days last year, a deputy sheriff spent 24 hours around the clock at our hospital. Not to mention the 4 and 5 hour visits that we take inmates over there. And guess what happens? When you pull someone from a pod, you're calling a ring down list for overtime. But if that's the direction that we're going, I'm hearing 51.9. That's what I'm hearing. I'm going to tell you that it's disappointing. I will tell you that, and there's ways in this budget. You know, I'd like to know the optional sales tax budget, the balance right now. You know, and I get that some of the roads aren't ready. I get that 20% goes to the lagoon. You know, and guess what? We're funding all the other things because I'm not a taxing district. I'm not an enterprise fund. And it's that simple. It's that simple. If I was an enterprise fund, heck yeah. If I was a taxing district, heck yeah. But my budget is formulated by the administrator to be plugged into the county's budget to make it work.
So, Jason, I get it. So, how long do you need to work up the numbers for the additional 100,000?
About 10, 15 minutes. We can come back with something. I just need to.
Well, where I'm sitting here, I've got three commissioners in favor of the 900,000. Sheriff, I want to commend you for your very passionate plea, but I think this is about where we're going to end up. And so we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break now and let staff come back with the revised numbers. And once we come back after that, there will be a final opportunity for any public comment at that point. So we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break at this time. We will call the budget workshop back to order. We've taken a brief break to allow staff to revise the funding options for the sheriff's budget. So at this point, Jason, could you go ahead and present what you guys have come up with? Guys and gals, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Sure. Thank you for your indulgence on the break. So for the additional 100,000, what we're looking at is that 800,000 that we had recommended up front, plus 50,000 from 911 surcharge dollars, additional to be used for call takers. So we'll be able to cut the general fund amount of the sheriff's budget by the general fund impact by 50,000, or we'll be able to increase it 50,000 while not having a general fund impact. Then we are recommending one of the vehicles, a replacement pickup truck, that we eliminate that. It's a $22,000 savings, and make up the rest by just increasing our half-cent sales tax revenue by the other 28,000. Taking on a little bit more risk there, but something that we feel comfortable with. That gets us the 100,000 additional. So that would get us to the 900,000 increase. So the total sheriff's budget would be $51,900,000 with that.
And Kristen, can you put back up the thing we had when we came back from lunch that showed all the first 800 and then the second? Okay, yeah. So then, Jason, the vehicle you're talking about, was that coming
That
from the
will-
bottom, or?
The second to last line is Road and Bridge 2 pickup trucks. What we're recommending is we just cut one of those 2 pickup trucks. I've talked to Rich about that, and he's okay with that. So that gives us basically 72,000 in impact there, and then we're just recommending that we would increase the half-cent sales tax revenue by the other 28,000 to get us to the additional 100,000.
Okay. Commissioners, everybody clear on that, where the funds are coming from? So what we're looking at then is going the extra 900, so it'd be the 51,900,000 would be the sheriff's proposed budget. Okay. Commissioners, any additional comments at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I have
Commissioner
two, not so much on the specific item or dollars that we're working on at the moment, but in the cost of the sheriff's facility and jail, utilities were dropping $100,000 lower this year. We still have, between propane gas and water and sewer, is close to $500,000 for those two. And I think it may warrant, I know Brevard County Jail recently went through an ESCO-type study for their water and sewer consumption at the jail, and they ended up with a program that had a 3 to 4 year payback, I don't know if we'd be in the same thing to look, facilities are about the same age. It may be warranted to have that type of study done and see if we invested $200,000, what would our payback be, or whatever the consultant might recommend. And secondly, with the natural gas line now coming around Aviation Boulevard, our propane gas consumption at the facility was another 6-figure number, and it may pay to explore what would it take to get natural gas, because that would cut the cost of those gas products significantly, I think in the range of probably 30%, but I give or take 50.
50, well, I don't know about the jail, but
Right.
for when Marsh Landing did it, it cut our bill 50%.
Right.
But much smaller, obviously.
So that may, but the premise would probably be very similar. So I think it's a good time that I think we need to look at both of those just in general for cost savings. It's not necessarily part of these
Right.
numbers that we're working at, but I think we need to.
Be
definitely
future
look at
ideas to look into.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Zork.
Chairman, if I could
Yes, Sheriff,
quickly
please.
add that, you know, we've talked about the sheriff's electric for years and years and years, budgeted 900,000 consistently. Last year was 824,000, 75,000 natural gas, 195,000 was water sewer. So in essence, the last decade, there's been at least $75,000. That's $750,000 over the last decade of where that presumably went back to the GR. That's a good thing. I just need clarification of if this body is stuck at 51.9, what 3 funds those are coming out of, so I can make a note of that. And I'd like this board's direction on inmate medical bills, inmate hospital stays, and the opening of the Echo building and who was going to fund that, just so I can, just so I have that knowledge.
Sheriff, you mean the 3
Yes, sir.
corrections,
For the
law enforcement and?
I didn't hear the vote, but I'm sure it's 51.9.
Yes, I believe at this point, the board is going to go with the 51.9. How you want to distribute that, I believe we've all said that's your job and your responsibility.
Yes, sir, but I was just curious, is it 1.478650 out of optional?
Yeah, I
Okay,
can
I'm sorry.
address that.
Okay, yeah.
And
So, yeah.
And then general, and then 911.
Right, so here's the recommended amounts, the 51 million, which was the 49.7 in general fund, 222,000 for 911 surcharge and 975 optional sales tax. So what the 51,900,000 as proposed would break down as is 1,478,650 in sales tax, 500,000 more than what's there. The 911 surcharge would go up by 50,000 to 272,975. So those two items increase 550,000. There would be another $350,000 increase to the general fund amount, which is 50,148,375, if my math works out correctly, for a total of 51.9. And what we can do is we will have budget go back and do a revised one of these that we send out to the sheriff and to the commissioners so that everybody knows that we're, so we're on the same page there. So a total increase of 900,000, 500,000 from sales tax, 50,000 from 911, and 350,000 more in the general fund.
Okay, now with the increase in the population, I need some guidance on how to fund that.
Oh, I would say that I'd reiterate the point made earlier that the sheriff is a separately elected constitutional officer, and we don't want to get involved with jail operation or inmate medical or inmate drugs. Those are things that have been historically funded out of the sheriff's budget. I think they should continue on with that, and it's part of the overall package there. And I would just say that I think just in closing, the recommended budget, if that's what if that's what the board ends up moving forward with on, is a $3.4 million increase. You combine that over the last 2 years, an increase of somewhere north of $7 million, and it would seem like there'd be funds available for raises there. I don't know I think Commissioner Fleischer had offered to sharpen the pencil and work with the sheriff. Maybe, we'd be willing to, if you can't figure out how to give raises with a $3.4 million increase this year, we'd be glad to talk, and, we don't want to get in your business, but.
Yes, sir. When you say 3.4, can I remind you of the 1.7 uncontrolled? Can I remind you of the capital? Can I remind you of that?
Sure.
Okay, now, you tell me how you're gonna give a pay raise when you've got mandatory P25 radios, you've got uncontrollable expenses from other areas that you've talked to about from Tallahassee, which we all feel similar about that. So minus that, you expect a salary increases. I'm trying to raise the starting to retain and recruit deputy sheriffs, so we're not losing them, because I've got a 10-month relationship with them before they can even go on the road. So if that's the direction that the board is going, that's fine. I agree with that. If that's what this board says, that's what we're doing. There's no sense in wasting time. The decision's obviously been made. But I do think that Mr. Brown knows in his heart that there's money there to fund this. This is the year to fund it.
I'm not holding back money. This is what we have on the P25 radios. I think that was the same amount as the current year, so there's not an increase.
No, I'm not saying.
It's 691,000, but it was 691,000 this year, so that's a zero increase.
I agree with you.
Okay.
But that is something that does not go to pay raise. That does not go to bodies. Absent the P25, there'd be $700,000. We agree on that. We agree that we're in year 2 of 3 of a cycle.
And we're going through the same thing with the BCC departments. We have to replace those same radios for our fire department, our road and bridge, our parks department, our utilities. We have hundreds of those radios too, just like the sheriff's office, and we're having to replace them as well.
Right, and obviously we have.
Sheriff, I think the board's committed to the number we're at, quite honestly. I think at this point, we're probably just going in circles and getting everybody heated up, and probably not what we want to do at this point. Sheriff, I have the utmost confidence. You've done this in the past, and I think you'll be able to find a way to achieve what you're looking for with the dollars the board is going to give you. I have the utmost confidence you can do that. And I'll say once again, this is in no way reflection on the men and women in your department. It's just that we have to make some choices here, and we can't give everybody everything they're asking for. So this is where we're going to be at. And so we'll just live with it and go from there. But I do commend you for your very passionate presentation today.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Zerk.
I agree with that. This budget is operating the facilities that are in use today, not if the population continues to grow and you have to open a new division. That's like what we've gone through on the road grading. They had a budget that was X dollars for grading and equipment, and now we're asking them to grade more, so we had to add more to it. If you're having to open up E-Block, you can't be expected to take $750,000 out of this increase to fund the operation of E. That's where the idea of you give us these population numbers the first meeting of the month, so when it happens, we're not surprised. But I don't see how you can fund it with that extra $750. You can't fund it with what we've provided. I'd rather almost keep that separate. If it happens, we'll have to figure out how to come up with it, but I wouldn't be expecting you to pay for it out of the budget that you have.
Well, I appreciate that.
Okay.
And it could be opened this weekend. That's why we came in with a budget that represents what we need. I'll leave it at that, and I will see you next Tuesday at the meeting. Thank you.
17th, yep. Thank you, Sheriff. At this point, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on the sheriff's budget? Good afternoon again. Welcome.
Good afternoon again. Have a good day, Sheriff. Shame you're not staying. Once again, Michael C. Marsh, P.O. Box 691061, Vero Beach, Florida, 32969. I could stand here and comb through this entire budget, and I would love to ask questions, but the sheriff made it quite clear. Mr. Brown and the rest of you aren't experts, so I won't waste my time doing that. But you guys have to say to yourselves, as much as I'm a thorn at his side and their side, I'm still a constituent. It's disgusting that this Constitution officer does not have to adhere or listen to anything the public has to say. What if it wasn't me jumping up here? What if it was someone from Johns Island that wanted to ask the sheriff a question? He does not care, but he can come here and speak to a county administrator like he's nobody, and that's fine. He's not God of this county. This is a just us system. County attorney, before you press the button, I'll come back full range where I'm going with this. But this is a just us system. So I have questions. So let's go through the budget. County attorney, on page, are you ready?
So, Mr. Marsh, first,
Yes.
please address the board with your
I'm
remarks.
sorry. I try to be all about policy here. So what do I need to do?
If you have a
Mr.
question-
Chairman O'Brien, I have a question about the budget. Would you answer my question?
What is your budget? What is-
All right. So, I'm looking at, this is on the law enforcement side of the budget. In the information technologies unit, I'm looking at where was the name of this thing at here? Please hold. The VM array storage. What is that? What are we paying $26,000 on? What does that get us?
That I do not know. Specific, every computer and every item in the budget, no. Sorry.
So do you see where I'm going with this? You don't know. The rest of the board has no idea. Mr. Brown won't, the rest, no one knows. Who would know the answer to this? The constitutional officer. That's my point. At what point do we actually hold these elected officials accountable? I mean, this is real money. This is not monopoly. $26,000, the board don't know, but we're approving it. You guys are going to approve a budget that there's things in here, you have no idea what it is. What's a 24/7 intensive use chair? Do you know what that is? That's 10 grand. That's our money, Mr. Chairman. Board of County Commissioners, these are real numbers. So you see what I'm saying? We're going to approve a budget. Is it just a numbers game? Is it just as long as he says this number, it gets approved? We have to look at these items. We really do. Of course there's money for these deputies to get raises. That's a joke. It's a travesty of justice for him to stand here and say he can't figure out where that money's coming from. He can. We're paying overtime every week, Mr. Chairman. Board of County Commissioners, if you do a public records request, you have these deputies that are doing overtime every week. For what? For what? Numbers don't lie. And that's the sad thing. If we're great stewardships of the taxpayers' dollars, somebody has to care. Someone has to care. Because I could stand up here, we can go law enforcement, we can go corrections, and you would give me the same response. You would. I mean, am I not right? Should I pick out two more items? And maybe Mr. Fletcher. Can I address Mr. Fletcher?
Certainly.
Mr. Fletcher, if you don't mind, sir, I'm going to put you on the spot because you have law enforcement experience. Some of these things might sound a little familiar to you. Could you tell me Palo Alto satellite fireworks? I mean, 4th of July just passed. I get it. What is that?
I think that's Palo Alto satellite firewalls. I don't think that's
Oh, it is firewalls. You're right.
California firewalls.
I'm still on the 4th there,
Making
Commissioner.
sure
Adams.
we're all on the same page.
Okay, we'll go back here. Firewalls.
Right.
What's that?
So there are many applications that every one of the constitutionals are required to have to ensure the integrity, control, and efficient operation for their IT department, as we do too. As you've noticed today, that we had to increase our IT expenses because of the constant continual threats to the facility, to the information. We have a high threshold of obligation to the citizens to ensure that the integrity of their information that we maintain is secure, as well as when some people make some public records requests, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that information has the integrity that it should have, and it's maintained without access of any of us or anybody from the outside as well. So many of those applications are there. If you'll notice, last year during the budget time, which you were present, You did hear that two of the constitutionals had to advance some of their computer applications. One was an unfunded mandate from the state, and one was for security, integrity, and control. So those two applications are an expense factor. They're unfortunate, but they are very much needed.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Fletcher. And you were able to answer that only because your law enforcement background. But my point is, if anybody else from the public got this offline and went through it, they would be totally clueless. What would they do? Reach out to the sheriff? I'm still waiting for an email from 2 years ago. So that's what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, I was just mentioning with the county attorney, some of us may not like committees, but you know what? We need to have a citizens budget advisory board where somebody can make sense out of this. Because if we're going to spend taxpayers' dollars, at least let's explain it to the taxpayers. Because I can go on for days of what's in here, and no one would be able to give me an answer. So I won't waste your time. But you know what? That's the next thing we need to look at. Because if the constitutional officer will not listen to the public, why have these meetings? This could have been done behind doors with Mr. Brown. I mean, he got beat up enough. You might as well took him behind doors. So this is a show. This is a show. So I'll leave you with this. I'll be back, and I hope we can form some type of committee, because if nothing else, have a liaison, okay? Because this is sad to look around and nobody cares from the public. Either that's the answer, or two, they're tired of the Just Us system and the good old boy club. That's it. Other than that, you guys did great today. If no one else tells you, you're special. And I am, you are, we are, no one wants to say it together, Team Success. Good day, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to comment on the sheriff's budget? Good afternoon, welcome.
Commissioner O'Brien, Chuck Kirby, 3142 Berkeley Square Way here in Vero Beach, 32966. I want to come up here, actually, I can count to three and I can see where you're at. And Commissioner, outstanding for you for even pushing that up another $100,000 where you got there. Commissioner Solari, absolutely, I understand with the possible amendments coming down the year for next year, how that's going to affect the budget, and some of that money may go away as we move forward. This is kind of an awkward position for me, but quite honestly, I'm up here to support the sheriff's request for the full amount for the 1.7. What I'd like to do is put a face on that for you. I came to work at the sheriff's office back in 1990, 28 years ago, coming off of active duty in the military. I was a very highly qualified candidate. And when I looked around, this was the best place. This was the premier agency to come to work at. I could have gone to St. Lucie. I could have gone to Martin County. I spent my last tour in the Coast Guard out of Station Fort Pierce, which put me in all those places where I could work with those guys. But I chose to come here for that reason. Quite honestly, there was the best pay. There was the best pay system that was here. The post-employment benefits, a lot of the other things that existed in the past. I know they're no longer here. But this was the reason that I looked. I said, you know, I can come off active duty and I can come here because this is a great place to work. And we need to still have that. As we're trying to get, right now, you've got 67 sheriffs, well, 65 of the ones that are not, the little bit.
They're still sheriffs, just not elected.
But you got 67 sheriffs that are trying to hire people. Everybody, it's not just here, all the way across the state. So as these guys look at opportunities coming out of these academies, or the guys, the best qualified candidates we have, they can go pretty much anywhere they want to go right now and do those things. So the unfortunate thing is that we're going to take probably our best qualified candidates, put them in the schools, because that is the most important, and it's the right thing to do. We have to backfill that, and we need the best qualified guys, and to get those guys, you know, the sheriff's absolutely right. What we need to be able to do is we need to be able to do both. We need to be able to do recruitment, which unfortunately takes money. When all the other agencies are paying more than us, it's very difficult to get those young guys to see the long picture. And then retention, I know at the sheriff's office and the young deputies in the back of the room here, we've got a dozen guys at the sheriff's office who've been there over 20 years that are not topped out as deputies. I know they asked for that money, and like I say, whether it exists or not, the sheriff and I probably differ on a lot of areas when it comes to how I would spend the money, but that's not my choice. That is his choice. He is the elected sheriff. I'm very supportive of technology. I think that Mr. Marsh is absolutely right. I think we need body cams. But at the end of the day, that's not my decision. At some point in the future, but I really stress, and I'll finish up, that please consider funding as much of what the sheriff has requested as possible for those reasons. Looking at it, and you know, coming back to the other side, I think Commissioner Zork, you mentioned the fact that we should look at our average daily stay and look how we can get people out of the jail quicker. Absolutely, that stops us from opening e-building. And in my 25 years with the sheriff, in my better than 25 years with the sheriff's office, I'm dual certified as both a correctional officer and a law enforcement officer. So maybe I am qualified to speak to some of those things. County administrator, you're absolutely right on opening that building. There's an option, we can look at some of the hubs that we have people in that are minimum security and moving them into that E building and then possibly renting that space out. It's not that we're gonna put them together, but you're absolutely right. I think that there's some merit in that, at least as an idea for conversation. So in closing this off, as you make your final decision, and once again, thank you for the guys in the back, they're still wearing these green uniforms, for taking this as far as you can. I hope the sheriff's able to do both, basically turn back around. Moving that salary up helps him get recruiting, but it doesn't help retention. Right now, we've lost officers and civilians to every municipality inside this county. Well, with the exception of Orchid, because there's only one guy there, and there's nowhere else for anybody else. But we've lost to every one of those locations. We've got men and women that used to be deputies and civilians for our agencies now working for those. And that right now, like I say, the big press, a lot of those folks are starting to look to St. Lucie, not so much because the pay's so much better, but because they have a step plan. So those guys can look at it. You go down to the academy. I had a friend of mine was down there. He's having lunch near the academy. Asked some of those guys, you guys going to Indian River County? They said no, and they told him why. I won't get into all the other with it, but it's the fact that the other agencies, when they go there, they know this is what they'll make in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, short of obviously the economy going in the tank. And I think that everybody expects that when it comes, just like we all did, as we all lived through that. So in closing, as you make that final decision and you get that 3 votes, as much of that money, I agree completely with Commissioner Fletcher. 1.7 is the way to go, and I know that you guys look at that, but at least think about that as you're looking at the recruiting and the retention and the people that we need to bring long-term, because that's what makes this a premier agency, is the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Is there anyone else in the public that wishes to comment to the sheriff's budget? Seeing none.
I just have one question for Jason.
Commissioner Fly.
Okay, again, the last speaker talked about 1.7. I'd like to ask Jason again, what is the actual increase in the budget?
$3.4 million.
Okay, it's $3.4 million is the increase in the budget. I just, we get lost in these numbers, and I might be getting old and slow, but I can only remember a few important numbers, which is why I'm not worried about a $27,000 budget item or anything like that. But the increase is
7%.
3.7%, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just want to have that as the last number, because that's the actual increase in the budget. It's not whatever amount we split the difference of. It's not whatever amount went up from where some person started or not. It's what last year's budget was and what the budget we improved today is, and that's up 7%. 3.4 million, you said?
3.4 million. The sheriff had asked for 4.2. He got 3.4 million increase out of a 4.2% increase requested.
So we got more than 75% of his increase.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it seems like we might be happier, but.
I'm not saying that we gave him everything he may want, but I don't think we starved him. And again, relative to every other department, almost in the county, he's at the top end of what the increase was once again.
I'd jump for joy if I had $3.4 million additional to spend on the county departments. Okay, thank you.
Well, in defense, though, 1.7 of it is things that they don't have a choice over, which
75% of our budget is things we've got no choice over.
That's true, too.
It is.
Okay.
And with Ed sitting in the audience, he can relay some of this back to his office.
So to recap, Commissioners, we only made 2 changes. One was to increase the State Health Department budget by $16,000. I think we had unanimous consensus on that. The other change is the additional $900,000 in the sheriff's budget. I think we're at 3.5, 4 consensus. So with that, Jason, I think the aggregate millage rate will stay the same. And I've got in my packet that we motions and votes, but we generally don't vote.
We don't need to take one here. We just need direction from the board, I think.
I can say in
see
previous
Dylan reaching
years,
for the.
in previous years, we've actually had a motion to adopt the proposed millage rates. We haven't necessarily voted on the budget portions.
That would be good, because we do have to send the proposed millage rates to the property appraiser and tax collector. So if you'd like to, yeah, that would be good to take a vote on this.
Why don't we just take this all in one vote or one motion, if you all want to do that?
Mr. Chairman, I will be very happy to make the motion to approve the proposed millage as presented.
Second.
Okay. For the clerk, is that good enough for you? Okay. We have a motion from Commissioner Solari, seconded by Commissioner Adams, to adopt the millage rates as presented today. Any discussion from the board?
And these numbers here that we're seeing have all been updated based on your adjustments, or no? I'm getting a,
The motion's on the millage rates. so we're
The
not-
the millage rates are unchanged. Some of the
Okay.
budget amounts will change. And just want to make sure we do say that aggregate rate's 5.9950, and compared to the current year, 5.9901, we're 0.2981 mils above rollback. So just want to make sure I get that in there, sorry. But yeah, the dollar amounts will change, but what we really need to set is those millage rates.
And the millage rate that's set today is set today, and the only change could be that it goes down, never up.
It
could go
technically
down.
can, it technically can
I
go
know,
up, but
probability and
it's-
possibility, but I just wanted it known that.
You have to send out a first-class mail notice to they'll get their, so these are the
That'll
amounts
be a
that are-
cost factor.
that-
To
yeah.
every property owner.
These are sent out by the property appraiser on the trim notices. We can always go down from there, and we can stay the same if we go up. There is a process, but you have to send
Very
a first-class notice to every property owner. It's a significant cost, so it's not impossible, but highly improbable.
So the motion is to
Done it
adopt
here.
the millage rates as proposed, which would include the aggregate millage rate,
Yes, sir.
I assume, and the second would also include the aggregate millage rate. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on the motion before us? Seeing none, all in favor signify with aye. Any opposed? That motion carries 5-0. Just for the record, we will have a preliminary budget hearing on Wednesday, September 12th at 5:01 PM here in the Commission chambers. And then the final budget hearing and adoption of the millage rates will be on Wednesday, September 19th at 5:01 PM here in the Commission chambers. I'd like to take this moment to thank Jason and Mike and the ladies for all of your hard work. As usual, you know, it's always having to make some tough decisions, and I think you all did a great job presenting the budget as you did. I think the board did a very good job with what we were looking at and how we resolved the one conflict with the sheriff's budget. So I want to thank you, everyone. And Dylan, you're not really in the budget, but thank you for keeping us out of legal trouble. So they're
Glad to be here.
already. Commissioners, anything else for the good of the public? Seeing none, we are adjourned.